Hello and welcome to the Animal Horizon, where we take a look at the most interesting, relevant news for animals and what's going on with animals around the world. And we get into it live right here for you to learn and enjoy and engage with us and hopefully help us make the world a better place for animals. I'm here with my co-host, Lauren Tanton.
Hey, everyone.
And we have a special guest today where we have Wayne Chung, an incredible activist from over in the USA who, as we go through the podcast, you're going to learn a hell of a lot about, I'm sure, with his incredible knowledge that he has. If you want to learn more about him, do get that down in the description. We got a link to his page down there. Wayne, how are you doing?
David, do you always have to set expectations so high? No, I'm going to disappoint everybody because I don't know shit. No, I know a few things about news and animals, so hopefully I can share something interesting.
Fantastic. Well, that's why you're here. That's what we talk about here. News and animals. You're in the right place.
Let's do it.
So our headline topic today is we're talking about Donald Trump. We're talking about Donald Trump and lab meat. We're talking about Donald Trump and big meat. There is a lot to go into today. Lawrence, you're going to kick us off with the first story.
Yep. And I already said to David that Wayne, as anyone who knows him will know, is knowledgeable on politics and animals in the US. So I'm looking forward to having my ass handed to me by Wayne's commentary when I have severely under-researched this topic compared to him. Cool. Okay. All right. Let's get on to the first topic. So first topic is the Trump administration. As I'm sure you'll all know, unless you've been living under a rock, they have just come in. They've started making changes. And what I wanted to do was look at how we can expect, because we don't know, obviously, at this point, but how we can expect the new Trump administration to impact animals. What sort of changes can we expect? So the first thing I wanted to go over was what did we see in the last administration? Because Trump has already done one term, right? It was a different team, but obviously it's still Trump. So I wanted to go over what we can expect based off his previous term. So I've got this article from the Humane Society of the US. This was published in 2020. So what they go over here, so there's a bit of preamble, but the main things are captured here. So first they tackle the positives. So one of the positives was that the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, announced plans to end all tests on mammal species, so that includes dogs, mice, and rabbits, by 2035. So obviously this isn't ideal, but this is moving in a positive direction. The next point
Biden reversed that, just FYI.
Oh, did Biden reverse that? Okay, well.
Yeah.
Okay, well that is depressing.
I know. Maybe that is depressing.
Maybe we'll see that come back under Trump again. Who knows? Again, he does have a different team, so we can't expect things to be exactly the same. But that's depressing that got reversed. The next one was the Bureau of Land Management agreed in 2019 to return to a policy from 2014 that was designed to prevent horses from being funneled to slaughter. Basically, it targeted, from what they're saying here, individuals and organizations, basically limiting how many wild horses can be purchased over a certain period of time, 6 months. In 2018, the Trump administration had moved to allow 25 horses to be purchased at a time with no time limit between purchases, making the animals vulnerable to mass purchases by kill buyers, which I'm assuming what that means is that it was a positive change that happened whilst Trump was in office, but maybe not spearheaded by him, because that seems to conflict with the move in 2018. I don't know if you have any knowledge of this, Wayne. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, so there's been this transition over the last 10 years away from sale to sanctuary. So for a long time, it was totally legal for horses to be shipped for slaughter to places like Mexico, Canada. Apparently, a lot of French people eat horse meat, which is despicable. Sorry to any French members of our audience, but eating any animal is despicable. One thing that's actually come out in the last couple of years is that this transition has not been very successful. So nominally, these horses are supposed to be more limited in their capacity for slaughter, both the numbers of horses you're allowed to ship and the availability of alternative programs for shipping wild horses. Basically what happens is the Bureau of Land Management is pressured by factory farmers who want to use all the land for cattle grazing and don't like the fact that wild horses are eating the grass. And so they used to just gun them down and shoot them. People got upset about that. So they said, we'll ship them out. And then people found out they're shipping them off to slaughter. And so for most of the last 10 years or so, there's been this transition and increasing amount of federal money being sent to supposedly place these horses in sanctuaries. But there were a lot of investigations over the last couple of years. Some good friends of mine documented not only like abusive practices when rounding the horses up. So we did a video a couple months ago of this guy just like kicking, just viciously beating this horse in the face over and over again. He was down on the ground because she couldn't get up. And they're trying to drag this horse into a trailer. The horse won't go. And obviously the roundup is terrible. So it's like, okay, I mean, that suggests these places are not the nicest place in the world, these supposed sanctuaries. But then there was another investigation the New York Times did that found a lot of these supposed sanctuaries were basically places that were being paid by the government. So they're paid by the government to place the horses in good homes, and they're still shipping them to Canada and Mexico for slaughter. It's like a complete front operation. So they get like $4,000 or something like that from the federal government for every horse they supposedly place in a sanctuary. And then we trace where the actual horses are going. They're still ending up in slaughterhouses in Mexico. So it's been a broken program. I don't think you can blame Biden for this one because I think this program's been broken for the last 10 years. But it's another example of how the government has just failed. I mean, the government does not serve the interest of vulnerable beings well. That's true of human beings, but it's even more true of animals.
Right. You know, what's interesting is just a side note there, like not to go off on a tangent, but it's interesting that a lot of people look at horses, a lot of people in the West, probably most people in the West, and they'll say, oh, how could you ever hurt a horse? They're such beautiful animals. And they're generally seen as these just gorgeous, beautiful animals, right? Most people find them physically to be, I don't know, attractive's not the word, but you know what I mean? They look nice to most people. Majestic
yeah.
probably
Exactly
is the word, right? But yet, when it comes to the people handling them, what you described about them punching the horse in the face because they wouldn't move, that's something I've seen many, many times with pigs and cows who people don't tend to think are majestic and don't tend. But it's interesting that when push comes to shove and they're in a place where people are, you know, profiting off them, they're all treated the same regardless of that kind of viewpoint from the rest of the world, if you know what I'm saying here. So it's interesting 100%. That when at the end of the day, a horse is just as much you know, product as a cow is or as a pig is to these people, right? It's and I'm sure that bothers a lot of people for the reasons I said as well, you know, more so than pigs and cows.
True of human beings too when they're treated like property. If you look at concentration camps or slavery in the United States, I mean, you treat human beings or animals like things and inevitably abuses will happen. This is why we need animal rights. I mean, it's not enough just to improve animal welfare. As long as they're treated like property, they're going to be people who beat horses, who kick horses, who kill horses. It'll be totally legal, but the animal has no rights. So what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, 100%. Then there's a few. There's a sort of minor point here which I'm not going to go over in detail, but it concerns the use of certain the transportation or use of certain service animals on air flights. So going into the negatives again, I'm not going to cover all of them. But I just wanted to touch on maybe one or two sort of more significant ones. Well, Wayne is going to be more accurate in determining which ones are actually more significant. But in my layman's eye, which sort of seemed to me like the more significant ones. So one that seemed pretty significant to me was this second one. The USDA finalized a federal rule to do away with slaughter speed limits at pig slaughter facilities. So what I get from this is that there was some speed limit in place. Presumably that is the number of animals that you're allowed to kill in a certain given amount of time, and that's being removed. So my understanding is that one of the most negative impacts of this will probably be that they can just kill more, like a higher volume of animals in any given time. Maybe they can make their slaughterhouses more efficient, or the ones that they already, like the ones they have, they could maybe scale up in terms of numbers, or they could shrink down the number of slaughterhouses, saving them costs. Either way, it seems like it's going to benefit the industry there. Wayne, I don't know if you're going to hand my ass to me again on this one, but do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's that was a big deal. I actually think the bigger deal was not the pig slaughterhouses, though, was the chicken slaughterhouses around COVID-19. And just to give people context, the slaughter limits for chickens, and the reason it's bigger is because pigs, because individually there's a lot more monitoring of an individual pig. If a pig slaughter line increases, the odds that a pig ends up in a scalding tank fully conscious are still relatively low. I mean, it does happen. It's vile and evil. I mean, if you read about human beings have experienced being dropped into scalding hot water alive, it's the accounts are like some of the most disturbing things I've ever read in my life. Just the amount of pain you feel all over your body. But with chicken slaughterhouses, they actually increase the lines from 140 to 170 per minute, right? So that is per minute, not per hour. Every minute, you're talking about almost 3 chickens every second passing by you. And you are supposed to, there's usually maybe 1, maybe 2 workers checking to see these animals are actually unconscious and that the electric stun bath and the blade have actually killed them. And if the electric stun bath hasn't stunned them, and so basically what happens is, this is going to be disturbing, but the typical way chickens are slaughtered in the United States is they hook them on a slaughter line upside down. The chickens basically get dipped into electrical stun bath, supposedly incapacitates them. But if the chicken just raises her head up, which is a natural thing, why would you want your head dipped in electrified water when you see all these other animals convulsing in the water? Then you're conscious when the blade goes by. And then if you lift your head and avoid the blade as well, you're fully conscious when you go in the scalding tank, which is the next step. And there are plausibly millions, if not tens of millions of birds that go through this process already. And the only accountability, the only checking mechanism to prevent these animals from being scalded to death alive, and that means scalding hot water going to your eyes, your nose, up your anus, just everywhere, scalding hot water everywhere. And it's like, it's melting your body from the inside out. And again, if you haven't read accounts of human beings who've gone through this, there have been human beings who have been dropped into like hot water geysers, these geysers at Yellowstone, and they've just fallen in and they've been saved miraculously. And they describe the experience. It's like, they say it's the worst pain they've ever experienced. They just didn't even know pain like this was possible. And there's usually 1 worker responsible for determining 170 chickens per minute are fully unconscious. And they sometimes are working like 12-hour shifts doing this, right? Just like staring. And they have to manually, and here's the thing, they actually have to hit a button and stop the line, right? Which pisses their bosses off because they're stopping a line where 170 chickens every minute are going by. It might take you 3 minutes to fix that. That is 500 chickens that didn't get slaughtered. And your boss is going to be pissed, right? And it's a lot easier to say like, who cares? I'll just let those 10 chickens. And whenever we do, so we do investigations, and part of our investigations, we do these things called Freedom of Information Act requests, where we ask the federal government what their own inspectors have found. Virtually every chicken slaughterhouse we do these FOIA requests for, we find inspectors saying over and over again, there are animals going to the scalding tank alive. In some cases, we found like 20 animals over the course of 5 or 10 minutes. And this is totally illegal. It's like grotesque animal cruelty. It's a felony to do this, but the government lets people do away with this. And the Trump administration actually increased the slaughter line speeds. I believe it was from 140 to 170 per minute. 140 is already absurd. 170 is just like impossible. You cannot, I mean, just think about what you can do every second. What are the number of tasks you could do every 3 seconds? How many people, even the best chicken experts in the world, could assess whether an animal is fully unconscious 3 times a second? And that's what these workers are supposed to do. So it's absurd. And it's just like, it's another example of just how broken the entire system is. But that was one of the worst things that Trump did, for sure.
Maybe jumping the gun here, but just to, you know, with the theme of the title of this stream, is Trump bought out by big meat, right? Is that what happened there, in your opinion? Is that he did that because he was lobbied to do that?
Yeah, I think that's part of the story. So for people who don't know this, Big Ag contributes to Republicans at like an 80 to 90% clip. It's virtually all to Republicans. I will say one of the bizarre things, however, is that Democrats are almost just as bad as Republicans in this regard. And if you created a laundry list of all the terrible things that Obama did or Biden did, you'd find similar examples of just atrocious things. So I almost think there's like a cultural corruption. It's not just a financial corruption, although, so one of Trump's 5 biggest donors back in 2016 when he launched his campaign was the owner of this big poultry company called Monterre. So it is the case that there's literally tens of millions of dollars, even from this one single company, going into Trump's campaign coffers. But there's also just this cultural paralysis because Democrats and Republicans alike are just so scared to go after big meat because America is a country of farmers. I mean, we're founded by farmers. 100 years ago, 50% of Americans lived on farms. Today, that's just not the case. You know, less than 1% of American workers are involved in agriculture. but the culture is still very captured by the industry, even though the industry in many cases, it's like some foreign company, right? So like the biggest pork production company in the United States is WH Group, this huge conglomerate based in Shanghai. And yet the political system still bends and even in some cases breaks to cater to these companies' interests. And it's pretty disgusting.
So it could be. So you're saying cultural. So it's like basically they're worried that to be frank, people that look like me today, like very lumberjacky kind of country, they're worried about losing the support of that kind of person, because that kind of person would see, like if Trump said, "Oh no, we're going to slow down the lines for animal welfare reasons," then the people that are dressed like me are going to say, "Oh, that to me seems like an animal rights move, and we're not going to vote for you again because that's against my kind of people. We're the meat people, you know." That they see it as an affront. Is that the fear, do you think, of these politicians?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I don't even think it's like a rational kind of electoral response necessarily, though. I think a lot of it just has to do with even their sense of self-worth and self-identity. I mean, it's the same cognitive dissonance avoidance that most non-vegans have, because if you start thinking about animals as living beings with interest and maybe rights, then suddenly you're part of a system that is a tyranny. It's
so
an
you're saying it's like
atrocity.
so you're saying it's probably okay. So I get you. It's like a combination of not wanting to lose votes. So the cultural side of it, the financial side of it, and also the personal motivation of not wanting to acknowledge what people are telling them, because then they would realize they're being hypocritical or inconsistent.
So a big part of the problem is the animal rights movement doesn't really raise a political argument in the face of the opposition to our movement, typically, because we're just not vocal enough. And I don't think we usually make a very intelligible argument for animal rights. So I'll give an example. Back in 2020, when Biden first came into office, you may have heard about this, but there was this huge controversy over the Hamburglar. Did you hear about this?
No.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a prominent MAGA supporting member of Congress, basically had a hearing where she said Biden has become the Hamburglar. She even posted this on Twitter. She has this meme.
Okay.
So she basically has an image of Biden eating a hamburger and says, I think the meme was something like, "Burgers for me, but not for thee." And the idea was, we're going to take all your burgers away. And so, the response by the Biden administration and Democrats and progressives was not, well, actually, I mean, there are good reasons for us to reduce burger consumption. The climate consequences, avian flu spreading through dairy and beef cattle now, even. Obviously, the ethical consequences of slaughtering animals for meat. But instead, they just basically ran. They were terrified. And there was no intelligible opposition. It was just like all the Democrats were just scared. Another example of this is when Cory Booker, the one prominent vegan in the U.S. Senate, and I think the only vegan, there's not two vegans in the U.S. Senate, actually. It's Adam Schiff and Cory Booker. Adam Schiff is actually my senator. But when Cory Booker was asked about his veganism when he was running for president back in 2019, he immediately pretended he wasn't vegan and didn't even offer up a defense of it because he was just too scared. And if there's one thing that you learn, I've been involved in legal arguments and debates for virtually my entire adult life. I'm a lawyer. I'm professionally trained in debating. And I'll tell you, if there's one thing that will absolutely lose a debate is if you are a coward, right? If you sound like you're embarrassed of your own position, no one else will be convinced by it, right? Because you were supposed to be the defender of the position and you're afraid of it. And so fear is something that it's almost like a primitive evolutionary response human beings have, that when we see other people are afraid, we become afraid of that position too, and we want to flee. Just like if there's some physical stimulus in the world, if someone's running away from some building, you're not going to go into it. You're going to be like, oh shit, I probably shouldn't go in that building. That person's looks scared and is running out of the building. And the same is true of ideological or even rhetorical positions. If you see someone who's afraid, you're going to think oh, I don't want to be there. And if I go watch the debate from 2019, Cory Booker, and bless his soul, I love that he's vegan. He's done a lot of good stuff for animals, but he was so scared of his own position that I'm sure vegans all over the world decided we can't defend this position either, because someone as brilliant and confident and powerful as Cory Booker, even he is scared. And I think that's kind of part of the reason the animal ag industry has so much power, because so many people are just afraid to fight against them.
Right. Right. So in conclusion to your point there, Lawrence, that is a big deal that he did that.
Yeah.
I like how deep we got into that.
Yeah,
but I also feel bad for you because you had your whole plan When like Wayne is absolutely giving us some incredible information here.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely worth stopping for. So apologies for that, Lawrence. If I know you've got a plan you want to keep on,
No,
ticking
it's
on
all
through.
good. Just look at it as I'm providing the skeleton and Wayne is basically putting a flesh suit on it.
Yeah. No, absolutely, yeah, because that was essential information that I assume that you wouldn't have provided, Lawrence. No offense.
Yeah. So so the second point I just wanted to quickly touch on, which again I'm perceiving as one of the more significant ones, is this top one, which is the U.S. Department of Agriculture cut back on Animal Welfare Act citations and enforcement actions, which I'm basically reading as the laws on the books or the regulations on the books were basically just being enforced less. Is that a correct interpretation, Wayne?
Correct.
I know Wayne knows about
drop.
this.
It was like a 90% drop in enforcement. I think total number of civil fines imposed on laboratories, circuses, and other facilities regulated by the Animal Welfare Act went from like something like $12 million to $150,000. So it was like literally it was like $150,000 in fines for a multi-billion-dollar industry. It was less than a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
So it was pretty embarrassing. And I will say that went down from a level that was already pretty pathetic. Like $12 million in fines. I think it was something like $12 million in fines before Trump came into office on an annual basis. This is for an industry that has like well over 100 million animals that are being regulated.
Yeah.
So the USDA's own Inspector General, so there's an internal watchdog called the Inspector General. Incidentally, the Inspector General was just fired by Trump. But the Inspector General at the USDA had repeatedly indicated, going back as far as 2005, that enforcement of the animal welfare laws in the United States, and this is a direct quote from the IG's own report, and this is not some radical vegan, this is like a government bureaucrat, a lawyer who's just looking at the enforcement of our own laws, describe enforcement as basically meaningless. That's the way they described it. And that was the case in 2016 when Trump came into office, and Trump took that basically meaningless enforcement and reduced it to 100% meaningless, basically. Because I think I believe in 2017, there was like one single complaint filed, right? So 100 million animals in labs, circuses, puppy mills. And I think there was like one complaint, I believe, filed. And it's just like, that's like saying in the United States, we have 300 million people in this country. I think there have been 3 crimes committed, right? What are the odds that in a particular year, 3 crimes are committed among a population as large as this? And they had 100 million animals under their supervision. They said, oh, we found 1 violation. It's like, come on, this is you're out of your minds. And it's the way Trump rolls, though. He likes corporations.
Yeah. So I very quickly, to finish off looking at his previous term, wanted to go back to a positive, which again, I'm sure Wayne's going to know more about. So I came across this PACT Act, so Preventing Animal Cruelty and Torture Act. And what this act basically seemed to do, so it was a bipartisan initiative, so both sides were pushing this forward. And it basically banned what can maybe be captured as like extreme gratuitous acts of cruelty towards animals. So intentional crushing, burning, drowning, suffocating, and a few other things they list there. And it applied to living non-human mammals, birds, reptiles, or amphibians. And it also banned stuff like Animal Crush videos. So that seems like a positive. I don't know how much of an impact that has had. I don't know if you know anything about that, Wayne.
Virtually zero actual enforcement, unfortunately. So we actually tried to take a look to see if there had been any prosecutions or even investigations in our pact since it was passed. This is back in 2019, I think. And we weren't able to find a single enforcement action, which is not surprising. I still think it's progress. I think the fact that we have the law in the books, it's the first general purpose animal cruelty law at the federal level. There are a lot of state cruelty laws, but the federal government has a lot more resources. And, it's like a much stronger sign to the industry when the federal government is passing a law that prohibits animal cruelty of various sorts. And I will say the PACT Act has this long list of things, but this prong about other serious harm. To me, this makes things like factory farming just illegal. There is a federal law because think about a gestation crate. I mean, gestation crate is a cage where mother pig lives in 14 square feet, a 2 foot by 7 foot box her entire life. They go psychotic. Or you think about castration, the routine castration of baby pigs, the maceration of baby chicks. I would say being ground up into 1,000 pieces in a macerator moments after you're born is a form of serious harm. There is an exception under this law for animal husbandry practices, but as of most of these exceptions, I don't remember the exact language, but it says something like it has to be an acceptable or customary animal husbandry practice. And our argument is that, look, how can it possibly be acceptable to cut the testicles off a baby animal without painkillers, to grind a living being up in a macerator moments after he's born, right? These are not acceptable practices. And, the question is acceptable under whose standards? And my view would be, in a democracy, acceptable should be defined by the people, not by corporations. And unfortunately, a lot of federal prosecutors have decided the industry gets to define what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So there's not been, as far as I know, a single prosecution of anyone under the PACT Act. So,
yeah, and it just makes me kind of think. I mean, this isn't a perfect sort of way to think about it, but if you take a practice which is standard in an industry and think about what would my reaction be if just a random person on the street did this to a random animal in the middle of the street in front of people, how would we react to that? That should at least go some way to inform how we think about the practices in the farming context, right?
Yeah.
And this just kind of goes to prove that, there's a law on the books saying that things like, crushing, burning, drowning, these sorts of things are all, illegal. Individual people should not be doing these. And yet these, even if they don't happen intentionally, they happen unintentionally enough in agriculture for surely us to put a stop to this. Even if we're not looking at intentional harm done, just the unintentional, like you were talking about before, with the speed of the kill lines, right? It's like if you're operating in that sort of environment, there's always going to be massive amounts of unintentional harm. And surely that alone is a strong enough case to just do away with all this stuff.
To play quickly, because I agree with you, but also I would say, like, we have to be honest, and like I would find only a small flaw in what you said there, and then I will finish by actually
go on.
What I see strengthening what you said is that I think we do make different rules for different areas in society. So, for example, you couldn't go out on the streets and go and murder somebody, but if you were in the army and you were in conflict, then you would murder somebody, and it would be acceptable in that circumstance. There's lots of things that you can do that are acceptable in certain circumstances, such as, like, for example, lots of things. Like, you could operate on somebody without anesthesia if it was going to save their life, for example. There's lots of circumstances where this, but when it comes to animal agriculture, if somebody were to make that same excuse, that same kind of reasoning, well, it's essential, we have to do it. That's where it would be different, where, if you were in a situation where you had to kill somebody or to defend yourself or to defend your country or whatever it is, and it was a legitimate reason, then you could justify it. When it comes to doing these things to animals that Wayne described, there are no legitimate reasons to do it. It is simply for a bacon sandwich or for a burger, for a piece of cheese, all things that we're only doing for pleasure, basically. And so, and even to be honest with you, even for the people who are always going to eat meat and are always going to eat cheese, are always going to do those things, even they would most likely agree that with the things that Wayne said were abhorrent. Even if they're going to continue to consume animal products, they would probably want those things to stop. Like Wayne was saying about, castrating animals without any anesthesia, or putting them into blenders as a couple of minutes old, like in the case of the baby chicks. I'm sure even your most hardcore meat eaters in the world are not going to want those things to continue. So that's the point of democracy. If we're all aligned on this, which we should be, vegan, vegetarian, or neither, wherever you will stand on the spectrum of animal consumption and use, I think we could all agree that those things need to be stopped, right? And so then with this law that we were showing up on the screen, well, I mean, that should have done that. That's the point, that this is what this should achieve. It should achieve that whole kind of, it's kind of this agreement across society that we all don't want that to happen, regardless of our personal choices in terms of, not personal, but, choices in terms of consumption. Yeah, but it didn't work that way. So it was pretty much meaningless, I suppose, then in the end, to even put this thing in, right?
Yeah, I'd be interested in your take on this, David, and yours, Lawrence. But there's a common phrase that animal rights use that it's from Paul McCartney, that if slaughterhouses are glass walls, everyone would be vegetarian. I don't think that's true. However, what I think is true is if people knew how, and I think part of the reason it's not true is because even when people see these things in the same way that people see atrocities against other human beings and it becomes normalized, as long as they think the government, the authority structure around them, the society around them says, okay, this seems awful, but I guess it's okay because it's been normalized. This is like literally what happened in the Holocaust, that you have all these normal Germans just going to work every day and saying like, this seems evil to be gassing children, but everyone says it's okay. And I think I think what we need is not glass walls in slaughterhouses. We need glass walls in the regulators' offices. If people actually saw the number of lawless activities that the government just doesn't do anything about. So again, I'm actually looking at the actual text of the statute. It literally says that anything that is serious bodily harm to an animal is a crime under federal law, unless it is a customary and normal agricultural husbandry practice. How is roasting animal live a normal practice? How is cutting the testicles off a screaming baby a normal veterinary practice? How is macerating a baby chick in a macerator a normal practice? None of these things are normal. The industry itself concedes they're abnormal, like ventilation shutdown, roasting animals alive. And yet there's just no enforcement of these laws. And I think one of the big mistakes animal rights activists make, and I've been trying to push back against this a lot in recent years, is saying that animal cruelty is legal. I think that actually shoots us in the foot, because if we say it's legal, then the average person just thinks, well, it's legal, I guess it's okay. Because most people, this is just like a fundamental flaw in human psychology, but it's true that most human beings comply with authority. And so if we say something's legal, people will say it's okay. And what we should be saying is the biggest criminal enterprise in the world today is factory farming. It is not a lawful enterprise. It is not an ethical enterprise. It is an enterprise that through corruption gets away with mass law-breaking activity in the same way that Al Capone got away with murdering people, in the early 20th century. And I think we should say that more.
And do we think so? Again, with the theme of the topic in mind, and we're going to get to lab meat as well. But with that in mind, like, is Trump owned by big meat? Is that the case? Is it the case that Trump and his administration, is it the case that they're likely going to aid in these continuous crimes, basically? Because I like the way you phrase it, in that if we have laws against what they're doing, and somehow they are able to circumvent those laws through lobbying and loopholes, they are maybe not, by the definition, they're maybe not criminals in the same sense as like like a hard line, you are a criminal, you go to jail. But like, I don't know what the word would be. I suppose they are, in a sense, criminals, but not in that same kind of way as like the more black and white
collar criminals.
White collar criminals,
yeah,
suits, exactly,
100%.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, and is he aiding them?
I think it's a mixed bag. So I think they're legitimately reform-minded people in the Trump administration, and I've gotten in trouble for this, but I think RFK Jr. is one of them. I don't agree with RFK on a lot of things. I think his position on vaccines seems pretty silly to me. But he is legitimately someone who's taken on big industries for his entire life. And he is cold factory farming, a soulless industry that commits unspeakable cruelty against animals. And he's talked about how he wants to take on factory farms. So you have people like that who are going to actually try and enforce the law. And he's done this. He's sued factory farms for environmental damage. He's talked about how horrible they are to animals and to human beings. But then you have people like Brooke Rollins, the new Secretary of Agriculture, who literally got in front of Congress recently and said she was going to illegally promote gestation crates. She was going to go intervene in states across the nation, and there are about a dozen, maybe even 20 states that have banned gestation crates. And Brooke Rollins doesn't have the right to allow or promote this activity, this use of gestation crates in states where it's been banned. And she said she was going to do it anyways. She's basically, that'd be kind of like, if a bunch of states banned fentanyl and said, look, you can't deal drugs. And Brooke Rollins said, oh, actually, we're going to help people selling fentanyl. Go ahead and do it anyways. And she literally said that. She said, at the USDA under Donald Trump, we're going to go into these states and try to prevent the state from enforcing their own laws to prevent mother pigs from being confined in what are effectively tombs. They live in a coffin their entire lives, a space that is small enough they cannot turn around, that cannot step more than a foot forward and a foot back their entire lives for 7 years. Imagine being trapped in a coffin for 7 years. That's what these mother pigs endure. States have banned this. It is illegal. It is a crime to do this. And Rick Rollins literally got up in front of Congress and said, yeah, we're going to go and promote that, even in the states where it's been made illegal. So it's a pretty mixed bag. I mean, my view of the Trump administration is the plus is he's so disruptive. He's going to destabilize a lot of broken institutions that need to be destabilized. On the other hand, his bias is definitely pro-corporate America. So like people seeing all the things Elon's doing, and it's one of the deep ironies is that Elon keeps talking about how he wants to cut government waste, and he doesn't talk about the billions of dollars wasted on funding animal cruelty, wasted on paying factory farmers to roast animals alive. If you don't believe me, if you think, no, surely the U.S. government, our taxpayer dollars can't be spent paying factory farmers to literally roast animals alive. That is what's happening. On a scale of tens of millions across the country, right now, there are animals being roasted alive, and we are paying for it, right? Because of bird flu, because a bird gets sick. And when one bird gets sick, their response to this is to shut down all the vents, pump in hot steam, and roast millions of screaming animals alive, and we pay for it. We pay for all the equipment they use. We indemnify the farmers for the chickens. Like, we'll literally pay them for the chickens. And this is the only business in the world where you can have terrible sanitary measures taken. Your business can collapse because you did a terrible job and all your product fell apart and can no longer be sold, and the government comes in and buys it anyways, right? Like if I make computer chips and I do a shitty job and all my computer chips are broken, the government doesn't come in and say like, well, you're a shitty business people, but we're going to pay for all of them anyways. And that's what the government does at 80% the market rate. And realistically, it's more like 100% because these farmers can scheme the system and game it so that 80% of the fair market value is actually oftentimes more than they will get paid at market. They will make more money by roasting their animals alive than by selling them in the grocery store. And Elon Musk talks about government waste. He talks about how he wants to cut billions from the budget, and he neglects to point out that we're talking about tens of billions of dollars in direct payments to factory farmers so they can do things like roast animals alive. So, and that's because of the corporate bias, because typically what they want to do is they want to cut things like some of the things they've been cutting are things like medical care for Americans across the country. Pre-K, literally Head Start got shut down because Elon said, this is a waste of money. Why do kids need school? And actually the evidence shows that pre-K is actually really valuable and it does a lot of good for Americans and for the global economy over the long term. But they're cutting things like that and not things that companies like Tesla and SpaceX and Neuralink, right? Neuralink, one of Elon Musk's own companies, gets a lot of federal funding for torturing animals. And it's so on the one hand, there's a lot of destabilization. You get like reformers like RFK coming in because the bureaucrats in place who are often terrible when it comes to animals will not have the same power they once had because Trump is such a disruptive force. On the other hand, his disruption is primarily going to be in a pro-corporate direction, and that's bad for the animals. So, my response to this is, look, there's going to be a lot of disruption. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for institution building by animal rights activists because Trump is like the destroyer in chief. He's just going to destroy everything. We can't allow the people under Trump to be the ones to rebuild these institutions. We have to intervene. It's our job as activists to make sure that we take command of not even just the legal apparatus, but the cultural apparatus around these issues so that when these things are being rebuilt, they're rebuilt in a pro-animal direction.
I was going
to ask, sorry, who do you think has more Trump's ear or more of a chance of having his ear? Do you think it would be this person that we just showed up on the screen, this Brooke Rollins, or do you think it would be RFK Jr.? Because obviously these are two people that have polar opposite opinions on this. I would guess that RFK Jr. would be against this because it's factory farming, right?
Yep.
These are both people who are they're both influential people in his circles. I mean, could you stage a guess at who you think is going to win that little battle?
I think RFK wins only because he has more public support, though. I think this is where all of us come into play. This is why shows like this matter. This is why YouTube videos going viral on a subject go matter. That post you just made by my friend Lewis Bollard, that was shared tens of thousands of times, including by a number of right-wing influencers. There's this dude, Christopher Rufo, who is like the king of the alt-right in the United States. Like he started the movement against DEI. He started the movement against critical race theory. He's like more responsible for anti-wokeness. And there's an argument Christopher Rufo is more responsible for Trump's ascendancy in 2024 than anyone on this planet. He shared that image saying factory farming is evil. This has to stop, right? And so people like RFK need support. And Trump is someone who is very attuned to the public mood. He's a performer. He likes, like, he's a weird dude because on the one hand, he has a lot of authoritarian tendencies. On the other hand, he's kind of captured by his audience, which is why he flips all the time. He flips based on what people are saying on Twitter. Literally, like he'll just see a bunch of people retweeting something, especially his people, but really anyone. If he sees something is really popular, he'll go in that direction. So abortion is an example of this, where in theory, he's supposed to be pro-life, but frankly, over the last year, I mean, he's appointed people like RFK Jr., who's pro-choice. He's talked about how he doesn't want a federal abortion ban, and he thinks, we should actually allow women to make the choice within at least the first 6 weeks. And all these right-wingers like, what the hell happened? And what happened was you saw massive public opposition to the reversal of Roe versus Wade, and Trump changed his mind because he's captive to his audience. Like, he's not someone who actually has any principles. He doesn't actually believe anything. Right. He just kind of does whatever. He goes wherever the wind blows. And we have to make sure the wind blows in a pro-animal direction.
Fair enough.
Cool. So you got something, David? Or
I was going to ask you where you want to go next, Lawrence, because I feel my guess is that Wayne basically covered everything you were about to cover.
Yeah, he's covered a lot of what I wanted to cover, but there's a couple of points that I wanted to quickly touch on, because I think there was one thing that Wayne didn't mention by name, I don't think, but you kind of spoke about it, which was the EATS Act. Is this, Wayne, is this what you were talking about when you spoke about the trying to essentially remove remove the state's capacity to enforce their laws around, you were talking about farrowing crates. So I'll give my brief explanation and then you can tell me where I'm wrong. So my understanding of this EATS Act is essentially it is a sort of movement from the federal level to essentially say to states that they cannot enforce their regulations for animal agriculture on the animal products being brought in from a different state. That's my understanding. So essentially what it does is it would create a race to the bottom where the worst farms will be able to operate and sell to any market in the US. And so, if their profit margins are higher, then it's going to incentivize that model, because even with that model, you don't get handicapped by the regulations. And so it could essentially result in this sort of race to the bottom. I think what inspired it was this Proposition 12 in California, where this is what basically was brought in, and it said, if you want to sell, meat or other animal products in California, they have to, even if they're not produced in California, they have to adhere to our regulations that a Californian farm would have to adhere to. And Danny at Lifting Vegan Logic did a video about this if you want to dive in more, but I'm sure Wayne's going to also expand on it. Or you kind of already went over it, but I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to touch on.
Yeah, so it's not clear what Brooks Rollins meant when she said she was going to undermine kind of the gestation crate bans across the country. Honestly, your interpretation that she was talking about the EATS Act is a more charitable interpretation, because that would actually be legal for her to do that, but it would require her to go through Congress, right? Because the president, unlike a monarch, is not allowed to just decide what the law is. The president is supposed to enforce the laws, including state laws. They cannot just decide, this is why Trump is a convicted felon in New York, because he broke a state law. And granted, it was after he was president, but he was actually charged for conduct that occurred when he was president of the United States. And at least according to New York law, even a president of the United States can be convicted of crimes. So the EATS Act is a law that basically says, at the federal level, we're going to preempt and undermine any state level regulations of animal agriculture, because we don't like these gestation crate bans, these cage-free requirements, whatever it is, can't scald animals alive, can't sell down to animals, whatever it is, we're going to get rid of all these things in one fell swoop, take it over at the federal level. And that would be a dramatic increase in federal power, and frankly, might be unconstitutional, but at least there's a debate. The reason it might be unconstitutional is because generally, under the American system, the federal Congress can only legislate on issues that relate to interstate commerce. They can't legislate just internally as to what a state wants to do. This is the system of federalism, that states can basically control their own affairs, and then the federal Congress comes in when there's some interstate effect. So the EATS Act would already be controversial, but at least be a legal mechanism. My reading on what Trump and Rollins basically said they were going to do is they're going to use just federal power to defend animal agriculture. And this could be things like expansive interpretations of the Meat Production Act, the Meat Inspection Act, or the Meat Inspection Act and the Humane Slaughter Act. You know, they could try and claim some wild theory of federal power that says, like, look, the federal government just can unilaterally declare that we have the right to declare things legal, and we have exclusive authority over slaughterhouses and factory farms. It's almost as if they carve out the factory farm and the slaughterhouse as these distinct zones that the federal government has basically unilateral authority to control. They could just basically deny on a discretionary basis states funding. So they can do things like, look, if you're going to enforce your own laws against these factory farms, we won't allow you to pay for your highways and your schools. We'll just take your money away, right?
Right.
That's something that Trump could have done. They could have even used federal agents to get into fights, like literal fights. You know, I mean, I think this is going to be extreme, but they could send federal agents, because Trump does have control over federal agents, to protect factory farms. And you can imagine like a gunfight scenario where you have state agents coming in to try and enforce the laws, and then federal agents firing back under Trump's authority to defend them. I think that's extremely unlikely. And one of the reasons that's extremely unlikely, unfortunately, is not Trump's and Rollins' willingness to actually do something that crazy. It's because, unfortunately, there's virtually no enforcement of state animal welfare laws anyways. So, for example,
Right.
and this is why, like, I mean, it's great that people are fighting it against Rollins, and it's great that a lot of states have said, like, oh, you know, no, we're not going to let the federal government tell us what to do on factory farms. But the reality is, Prop 12 and its predecessor law, Proposition 2, which banned, for example, the use of gestation crates for mother pigs. This law was passed in 2008 originally. It went into effect in January 2015. We immediately did both investigations ourselves, walking to factory farms across the state, and submitted Freedom of Information Act requests to state and federal inspectors indicating that there were widespread violations of this law, right? At least dozens that I could count, just from what I've personally seen in inspection reports. Again, a state inspector themselves saying, like, hey, there's still chickens in cages, this is illegal, just want to let you know. And they document this, they write it down. We got these documents from a Freedom of Information Act request. You guys want to guess, with all these violations, with literally hundreds of millions of animals, in theory, are under a new regime as of January 1st, 2015. In the last 10 years, you want to guess how many successful enforcement actions there have been against factory farms?
I think I know the answer, but Lawrence, you have a guess?
Under 10?
Zero.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I knew that. Wild.
What kind of a law is this when there's no enforcement? That's like saying, you know, like, we don't allow theft. And, you know, I mean, it's funny because Trump likes to talk about how we have a lawless society. We're letting people shoplift. We are letting factory farms get away with torture of animals routinely, torture that has been publicly opposed by the vast majority of voters. Like Prop 2, when it was originally passed in 2008, was the most popular ballot initiative in California history. 8.1 million of my fellow citizens in the state of California said, we do not want to confine mother pigs in crates. We do not want to put egg-laying hens in cages. This is abominable. It must stop. And over the last 10 years, since this law went into effect, there has been exactly zero enforcement of it. So, yeah, it's like the EATS Act matters, but it's like, okay, I mean, if there's no enforcement anyways, I mean...
Yeah.
Like,
then in practice, there's already
it's It's like, we're going to take away everything from you. And it's like, but we don't have anything anyways to take away. It's like trying to steal from someone who has no money. It's like, I mean, it's terrible. And I hate that they're trying to steal from this person, in this case, the state of California. But the reality is California is not doing anything anyways. So, you know, we got to change things. And like, this might sound absurd and crazy to you. And you might like, this should cause all of you to doubt the nature of democracy. Because when you see things like this, you start wondering, damn, what else is happening in our government? What other laws can just be flagrantly violated by powerful big corporations? And when you think that, and the deeper you dive into this, the more you think it's true. You start getting very, very seriously green-pilled about the nature of our government.
It sounds a lot like there's a word beginning with D. I can't remember. It's gone out of my head. But a lot of like MAGA types will talk about this as to why they need someone like Trump to come in and fix all of this behavior. What is it called? What's the word
deep
I'm
state?
thinking? No. Deep state is one of them. There's another word to describe degenerate. That's the one. They talk about how the USA is full of degeneracy and all things are going crazy. They need Trump to bring back common sense and law and order and make people law abiding. And it seems though
Clean
that
up the streets.
yeah, and it seems that and this is not a call out, but it's more of a call in to people who support that, because I don't think that's a bad thing to support. There is a lot of degeneracy. There's a lot of drug abuse. There's a lot of drug problems. There's a lot of everything problems in the US, and it does seem to have been getting worse and worse. And if you believe that somebody is putting their name to it and saying I'm going to come fix it, I understand why you'd want that person in, but it's got to apply across the board. Though you can't be against lawlessness only when it's the stuff you don't like. You also have to be against lawlessness when it makes you money. As in, like, if the lawlessness continues, more money is made. You still have to be against that, even if it messes up that part of the economy, even if it requires a big shift, even if it requires some uncomfortable things. You've got to be consistent on that. And I hope any MAGA types or Republicans or even just people who lean that way would listen to that now and make this one of their causes, But we're talking about here, make that one of your things that you want to change, right? And push your politicians to make that change. Because if that's what he's riding on, isn't he? Law and order. That's what they call themselves, isn't it? The party of law and order and things like that. Well, then, okay, apply it then. Because this is part of that.
You're 100% right, David. And a lot of the lawlessness you see on the streets is because of lawlessness that's happening at the corporate level, at much higher level. And drug use is a great example of this. Like, a lot of people are concerned with drugs. I live in a city, San Francisco, that has like open air drug markets across the city. We have 10,000 homeless people. A lot of them are addicted to drugs. You see people like wandering around zombie-like who are addicted to fentanyl and opium. And you might say like, oh man, what we have to do is just like put a lot of these druggies in jail. And you don't realize the real problem is a family called the Sackler family, a bunch of billionaires that sold opiates to America over the last 20 years illegally. In some cases, they literally bribed federal government officials and used doctored evidence and addicted millions of Americans to opiates, including fentanyl. Fentanyl's an opiate, right? And turns out when you're addicted to drugs, because your doctor, the government itself is telling you this is a totally appropriate thing, there's not much you can do about it at that point.
Right,
so like trying to address this problem downstream when people are already addicted to drugs the government's been selling you is not going to solve the problem. Similarly with issues like immigration, like everybody's so concerned, oh my God, we have so much lawless immigration. Do people realize that the biggest sources of illegal immigration and human trafficking in this country are factory farms and slaughterhouses? The factory farm that we investigate, and I got charged for exposing in southern Utah, was literally and this is not us saying this is independent media, and even the government itself eventually acknowledges, was implicated in a massive slavery scandal where they were shipping in people illegally from Asia to work at their factory farm without paying them. They were forced to work there. They didn't even speak the language. And they were told, if you call anyone, we're going to take your home away back in Thailand or Vietnam or China. So you better just sit there and work. And I mean, so you talk about like lawlessness at the border. I mean, this is the worst form of lawlessness you could possibly imagine, and we don't stop them. Right. So, and you can imagine like a bureaucrat sitting there at ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, saying, well, like, if we're not enforcing the law against this corporation that's shipping in 2,000 people who are basically slaves, why am I going to be concerned about the mother who's like a refugee coming from Mexico? It seems like the worst case of illegal immigration is the human slave being shipped into this country. But we don't enforce the law against the corporations. So of course the bureaucrat's going to say, well, like, I'm not enforcing the law against a factory farm. Why would I target this poor mom who's just trying to get in this country because her kid's starving,
And that's the kind of, this what you just mentioned isn't necessarily where a lot of the focus goes because there's too much money there. Like, I mean, this what you've 100%. Just described. No, I didn't know about this, and I'm in this world, and so I guess, I mean, I'm sure you've done content about it. I'm sure it's been out there, but it doesn't get pushed anywhere near as much as the other rhetoric about, oh, we've no houses because there's so many migrants and there's less jobs and prices. Everything that's wrong in your life is because of mass migration, which, I don't know if that's true or not, but let's just assume it is true. Fine, okay then. But a huge chunk of that migration is illegal, and like you've just said, in some cases, literal slavery, corporations breaking the law.
That have an interest in doing
that
this.
bit just gets, that bit that's like, oh, forget about that. Just focus on these other people here because we don't want you to impact our economic success on this side. That's wild. That's never been covered. Like that should be something that's addressed at that level. Like when Trump was debating about migrants and debate, this should have been something he brought up. We've had literal slaves in our country because of, illegal immigration, and it was by corporate. That should have been something he was bringing up in debate. Could you imagine how much of a? Yeah. But he either didn't
because who can support that form
couldn't.
of illegal immigration? No one can support that, right? The problem is, no one can support it. It has a lot of money at stake for a big corporation, and incidentally, the corporation that owned that farm is a Chinese company too. And yet, for all the Republican opposition to legal immigration, how many times have you heard them complaining about Smithfield Foods shipping in illegal immigrants to work as slaves in their factory farms? Probably zero.
I will do a post about this. I will actually try and do some tweets about this to see if we can catch some. These are the types of things that have viral potential, especially on Twitter, where this kind of stuff isn't limited, right? If something picks up. It goes wild. I think it would be shut down in most of the platforms, to be honest, because of the nature of it. But on Twitter, that's something I would like to see someone like we discussed earlier, Lewis Bollard cover, actually. Yeah. Maybe if you know him personally, because his tweets are going off right now. Maybe you could. Yeah, if you know him personally, you could give him a nudge on that, and because if he's got the attention of the Republicans right now, this is something that I think they would also want to share. So yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Lewis's office is just like a few blocks from where I'm sitting right now. And
oh, really? Okay.
I need to have lunch with him sometime soon. He's a great guy. Really, really cool, interesting dude. He was on Vivek Ramaswamy's podcast. Vivek Ramaswamy was the co-lead of Doge until very recently, which is the big government agency that Trump started with Elon Musk. He's cut government spending. And I'm actually pretty bummed he left that project because he's a vegetarian and animal advocate. And
Well, speaking of Vivek, we can get back to what I prepared because a lot of it has already been discussed, but I can quickly go over a few things that we didn't get to yet.
And then we're going to get
we'll be going to lab meat.
Yeah, I'm conscious we're an hour in. I bet some people are clicking now. Later on they'll click and they'll be like, okay, where's the lab meat? Literally. It's been an hour.
Yeah. We're getting to it.
Let's talk lab meat.
So, okay, we'll get to Neuralink in a minute, although Wayne has already mentioned it. So talking to Vivek, I just wanted to touch on a couple of examples because like Wayne said, he was going to be, sort of co-heading this, Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk. Obviously, he's not going to be part of it anymore. But his name has kind of been circulating a bit in the circles of people who are, advocating for animals because he has been putting out, or in the past, he has put out very sort of pro-animal messaging. So you can see here, I'm a vegetarian because I believe it is wrong to kill sentient animals for culinary pleasure. Obviously, it's a bit ironic because he's a vegetarian still means that you're consuming dairy, eggs. But at least a positive sentiment is there, and him being in positions of great power, and especially if he was in Doge, where like Wayne was saying, if you really want to cut waste, then focus on animal agriculture. Maybe he would have been more sympathetic to that, but maybe we'll never know now. Also, here he had another post on X. Animal cruelty will eventually become a genuine concern for conservatives. It's already happening. Count me in. Which,
look at that guy. Look at that. One of the top comments there from this amazing. Look at that handsome. Who is that? That handsome man there. Sorry, just got distracted. Got lost in his eyes in that top comment.
And so this is like the positive. This is like the positive stuff we need. But yeah, like Wayne said, he's not going to be serving. Very quickly on two other figures which are important to keep our eyes on. Elon Musk, Wayne has already mentioned. Obviously, so if anyone's following the news recently, you'll have seen how much sway Elon is having in the government at the moment. Who knows how long that relationship is going to go, but he has significant sway, at least for the moment, and he doesn't have an amazing track record, to say the least, when it comes to animals. So I'm sure anyone who is sort of vaguely aware of animal issues and Elon Musk will have heard of the horrors in Neuralink, where they were testing on, primates, and, I won't go into it in detail, but awful things were coming out. One other person I want to quickly touch on is...
Can I say something really quick on that too?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Elon Musk is the reason I got canceled from Effective Altruism, because he was speaking at the Effective Altruism Global Summit in, I think it was 2016. And because he was speaking at the summit, they reversed their vegetarian policy because Elon said, I'm not coming unless you serve meat. And I posted in an Effective Altruism forum, we should disrupt him. And I got canceled from Effective Altruism after that. They literally banned me. They said, and I think it was just one of the worst decisions that the leaders in Effective Altruism ever made. Because like if you don't stand behind your principles just because there's some powerful, wealthy person, then your principles don't mean anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was completely ridiculous. And for the record, I wasn't even saying, I even said like, let's disrupt this. And it can frankly bring attention to Effective Altruism. That's positive. We weren't going to do it in a violent way or an aggressive way. I was just literally suggesting, hey, someone should directly question him on this and say, how is it that if we're trying to do good in the world, we're promoting torturing animals and destroying the earth? That seems like its intention, but they didn't want the question asked. And that says a lot about Elon Musk too. I mean, I think fundamentally he's probably a well-intentioned person, but he's surrounded by yes men and he's not willing to question certain deeply held beliefs he has, including that animals are just things for us to use and abuse.
I'm not sure about this is a total side topic, but I see Lawrence is preparing his next thing. So while he's doing that, I'll quickly just I'm not completely convinced he's well-intentioned anymore. Not always, at least, because I've seen a few little things recently that have made me question his character more than I did before. Like, for example, he labeled himself, or didn't label himself. He like went out there and said, "Oh, I'm one of the top players in the world on this incredibly difficult game." Yeah. I don't remember the game. Oblivion. That was it. I think. Oblivion.
That was Diablo.
Diablo, right? Absolutely.
Diablo
like I've watched people playing it, and I'm just like, I like gaming. I have no idea what they're doing. You probably know. You're into that stuff, right? Or you were, yeah.
Yeah, I was a quasi-pro gamer in my prior life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I played Quake quasi-professionally.
Yeah. Well, so he is obviously very nerdy, so it was kind of like, oh, you kind of believed him. Maybe he is one of the top players in the world, but that's incredible considering how busy the guy is. And then it turned out he'd just been paying someone else or a team of people probably to play it for him.
That's
and he still holds on to it to now that he is the actual, I think he like semi-admitted it or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, but that made me, it's very petty. And so I wonder if this whole decision with you getting you cancelled potentially was because of how he's petty.
Yeah, he's manipulative.
And maybe they were worried about upsetting him so that he would, buy out their organization and then.
Have you heard about the crazy affairs he's had too? And when he had impregnated two women who were in the same hospital who did not know that there was another woman pregnant with his baby in the same hospital. Like, this is an uncontested fact that he had an affair. It was like Grimes, his pop star, was having his baby at a hospital. And he failed to point out to his, I think, wife at the time, or maybe certainly significant other, that, by the way, there's another woman pregnant with another baby. And he claims it was through artificial insemination, but no one really believes that. It's like this woman, Siobhan Zillis, who was, for the record, also his subordinate in Neuralink. She actually works at Neuralink. And they were both pregnant with his baby at the hospital. He did not tell them there's another woman pregnant with my baby. I think I've read enough about accounts of him to think that I still think he's trying to do the right thing. I just think power is incredibly corrupting, that you can justify all sorts of awful things when you have the amount of power he has, unless you have really, really strong people around you telling you, hey, what you're doing is wrong. You can get away, for example, having an affair and having a baby with a different woman and putting them in the same hospital and thinking that's fine.
Yeah. It's definitely a story for the grandkids, isn't it, though?
I know. Yeah, it's like, oh, by the way, your half sister was
back in my day. No, that's that's pretty wild. I never heard that one before. I'll have to look into that later.
Yeah, it's a crazy story.
Okay.
Go for it, Lawrence.
Cool. All right. I've got one final thing, and then we're doing lab meat. The one final person I wanted to touch on was Tulsi Gabbard. who I'm not going to go into this in detail. If you want to read the whole interview, you can on Veg News. But essentially in this, she just talks about how long she's been vegan, but she also says about how, which I think is pretty cool, whenever she hosts lunches for members of Congress, she always makes sure that they're fully plant-based, which I thought was quite cool. And it's just a way of, even if you're having a lunch with them that is about something completely different, it's just, you know, a nice sort of like way to make that sort of thing present, you know, making sure that you're in a sort of, you know, plant-based restaurant or, you know, the catering that they're having access to is plant-based and this sort of stuff. Anyway, that is everything I had on Trump. Now
we're still on Trump, though.
Can I just say one thing about Tulsi? I think Tulsi's the real deal.
Okay.
I think Tulsi's the real deal because we talked about how people like Elon don't stand behind their principles, or, you know, how important it is to stand behind your principles even when they're hard. Tulsi, to me, not on animal stuff, because she's, as National Intelligence Director, she doesn't really have that much direct connection to animals, unfortunately. But in the congressional testimony she just went through, she stood behind her principles because, and on a separate issue, but she's defended Edward Snowden, this whistleblower who exposed the unlawful surveillance of Americans back in the, I think, mid-2000s, or was the late 2000s, early 2010s. And for years, she's been castigated and shamed for defending this person, because he allegedly broke the law and now he's basically hiding away in Russia because the United States government has gone after him. And all these powerful people repeatedly, it felt like in McCarthy hearings, they demanded of her to concede that he was a traitor. They asked her over and over again, is Edward Snowden a traitor? And one of these senators from Colorado, it was like deplorable to me as like someone who believes in civil liberties. He's like screaming at her saying, admit that Edward Snowden is a traitor. How are you going to defend this country when you cannot say that he is a traitor? And she just refused repeatedly. And that cost her a lot because with both Republicans and Democrats, they did not like hearing that because this is someone exposed a lot of crimes committed by the U.S. government. And a lot of people in intelligence do not like this. And she's going to be running the intelligence agencies. She refused to back down and said, no, I'll concede that he broke laws. I will not say he was a traitor. He did things to expose unlawful activity by the U.S. government. And I thought that was incredibly brave. And that gives me a lot of hope that she'll stand behind her position on animals too. Now, of course, as National Intelligence Director, I mean, she controls like the CIA and the FBI. It's not as much about animals, but she is someone who's legit, I think, a brave person, seemingly.
Yeah, cool. That's interesting that she's got that. She must be quite robust then. And then I suppose that you would hope that if she gets an opportunity to do something that favors animals, you would hope that she would take it because she's that robust. Yeah.
For us, she's a vegan. That's how vegans are. That's how we roll. We stand behind our principles, and she's one of us.
Right.
Unless you're Cory Booker.
Unless you're Cory Booker.
Cool.
All right.
Okay. Nice one. All right. So, did you want to say something, David?
No, so we're going to talk about, finally going to get onto lab meat. And what I would like to say is that I think that what we've discussed so far is kind of like a preamble. It gives us good context to talk about lab meat because then we can talk about this, what you're going to talk about now, this labeling. And then we can also talk about the future of lab meat and how we think, for example, in the USA, the Trump admin is going to handle it. I think that's going to be quite interesting for us to get into as well. So yeah, take it away, man.
Yeah. So this is very cool. So, and you know, this is sort of very early development still in the sort of ecosystem of things around lab meat because it's still an emerging technology. So anyone that is sort of familiar with plant-based products and stuff like this, or you know, just basically anyone will know that if you have a product which is, you know, vegan, or they even have vegetarian ones, there's gluten-free as well. There are companies that run certifications, right? And essentially it's a standard or a set of criteria that a company's product has to adhere to. And then when it does, they can get the label on it, right? So V-Label, they have a certification which is called V-Label, and it essentially it's for vegan products. Now, they've just come out with this new label, which is called C-Label, which is going to be a certification for cultivated meat, which is very cool. It's the first of its kind, and we will get onto it, but it has just had its first company receive the certification, which is very cool. And as a bit of info before we actually get into the bulk of it, the UK, which is where David and I are from, are the first country to approve it for the UK regulator were the first to approve it in the world, which is very cool.
Cool, yeah.
So
Nice.
This is the logo for Sea Label, and if we scroll down, here it is. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to mention a few things. So these are basically the criteria that a product needs to meet for Sea Label to, for them to get a Sea Label certification. So for anyone that knows anything about lab-grown meat, cultivated meat, it can be it's a very different process, obviously, to how meat is traditionally, because you kill animals to get meat. But it can be complex to the average person who is not involved in the industry. But so it's grown in a media, and that media has to be animal-free. So it doesn't require animal-based media for the production process. Any intervention or procedure that does happen for an animal must be demonstrated to be necessary, painless, and stress-free for the animal. So, unfortunately, this technology is still at a position where sometimes some sort of interaction with an animal will have to occur. And so the certification is kind of recognizing that and saying, okay, if you have to do that, it has to meet these criteria. So, and then there are a few other ones which I won't go into, but, no GMO, no antibiotics, no pathogens, heavy metals, stuff like that. So that's very cool. I wanted to quickly go on to the first company who has received it, which is this company, Meatly, which we'll go into them a bit more in a minute. But interestingly, so Meatly is a company which I'm not sure if they're entirely based in the UK, but they are the company that has been approved by the UK regulators. And essentially what they do is they are going to be producing, because their products aren't actually on the market yet, but they will be in a couple of years. Essentially what Meatly do is produce cultivated meat for companion animal food or pet food. So many people in the animal space will be aware of the fact that, the vast majority of dogs, for example, will probably have no issue at all eating 100% plant-based diet. There are some cats which can also do that, but cats have more of an issue. And then you've obviously got other, companion animal species that people sometimes keep, like snakes, where, that they, I'm not actually aware of any sort of 100%. Yeah, 100% plant-based snake. I've never heard of that. Maybe there is somewhere. I've never heard of it. So all of these sorts of issues where, to, nurture and feed this animal that you care deeply about, but you have this sort of internal friction inside you, this moral quandary that to keep them nourished, you have to pay for other animals to be killed, many in the horrific ways that we've already spoken about, that, Wayne was describing earlier. You don't want to be funding this stuff to look after an animal who, by virtue of looking after them, that animals have moral value and need looking after. So, hopefully when this comes out, this will help remedy this moral issue that people face. So, as I've already said, here's just a Guardian article talking about the UK is the first. Okay, it's the first European country. So, we need some fact checkers on this show. But yeah, the UK is the first European country to approve lab-grown meat. And like it says here, it's the first for companion animal food. So this is Meatly's website, and I just thought it would be a bit interesting to not just look at the cute companion animals, but see the process, because actually there might be a lot of people watching who don't know the process, myself involved. I didn't know the process really that much at all before I started looking into it for this section. So it's a 3-step process. First step is taking a small sample of cells from a chicken egg once. After this, we never use animal products in our production ever. So this, to me, is actually extremely good news. So, some people might say, there's still some form of animal product involved. But being able to take some cells from a chicken egg, I don't know exactly how they did it in their production process, but in theory, you could just find an egg in a backyard, that is unattended by the chicken. They seem to be uninterested in it, and you can take a cell from that. This is harming no one, and you have to do it once, like they say. So this seems like a great development in this form of technology, that it's become so disconnected from animal use generally. The second step is...
Bro, are you even vegan? I'm just kidding. I'm not going to be one of those vegans.
No, I know.
I'm just kidding.
You're calling me
He
out
just
live.
outed himself. There you go.
He's
Man.
out of myself. I'm level 9 vegan, just so you know. I'm
So,
a member of the vegan police. I'm coming after you.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, just so I can make sure nobody unsubscribes from my channel, I totally disagree with Lawrence.
Am I
on
getting
all of that,
distanced
so-
now? People are distancing themselves from me.
Nice. Let's cancel this guy. Let's gang up on him right now and just cancel him. Let's end him.
No, I think all
We're
of
done,
us.
Lawrence.
I think we're all practical people that understand the
Yeah,
good thing when we
yeah.
see it, even if it's not perfect. I mean, veganism itself isn't perfect, but we're not
Exactly.
all, giving up on that and saying, "Oh, don't be a vegan because it's not perfect." This is not.
Except me. I'm level 9, so I'm perfect.
Except for Wayne. Wayne is perfect.
I don't
Well,
even kill
Wayne-
microorganisms. I don't have an immune system.
I was
None
going to
of
say,
you guys.
Wayne. I
Wait.
thought you were breatharian. I heard.
I
He
am.
photosynthesizes.
I don't eat plants. I don't kill bacteria. I have no immune system. I'm so probiotic. All the bacteria flourish in my digestive tract. No killing of bacteria.
And Wayne doesn't move either. He sits
I
exactly
don't move. I
where-
just sit here. I
right
sit
there.
exactly at all
Yeah.
times. I never move from this position. Somehow I got fit just standing here my entire life.
All right. So the second step is obviously, instead of there being animals involved eating grass and creating the nutrients for the cells, they do it. So they provide, vitamins, minerals, all the things that the cells need to grow. And then third stage is then they nurture the cells to grow in containers that control the temperature and acidity and all this sort of stuff. So very cool stuff. Like I said, the products aren't on the market yet, but they hopefully will be coming in a couple of years.
Are you sponsored? This feels like a sponsor.
No,
bit right
no,
now.
but I actually want to be sponsored. I feel
Nice.
like this is such a cool company.
Just to
That
be
is pretty
clear, guys, I wasn't versed on this before we started. I didn't know he was going to do what was practically an ad. This isn't an
This is
ad,
an ad,
okay?
yes.
I'm not getting any. Am I getting a kickback for this, Lawrence? Am I going to get
Hey, what about
get a
me? I
taste
want
of
a
what you've
kickback.
got
You're
coming
not,
in?
you're not
You
getting
gonna share
any
the
of my
love?
kickback.
All right.
So, yeah. So, and just for anyone's interest, if you want to look into sort of the state of cultivated meat generally, then there's this report by McKinsey and Company.
Mhm.
And at the moment, it basically just goes into the state of lab grown meat at the moment, and where it is. So yeah, you can have a read into that. One quick, very nearly final thing before I hand over to Wayne and David to give any thoughts is I thought it would just be quite cool to just see like another example of this company creating what seems to be scalable and cost-effective cultivated eel, which is, at least to me, very, very niche. But I'm sure that there are a lot of eels abused and killed out there for food. So stuff like this is going to be super positive to stop eels being used and abused for food. And my final thing I wanted to say, which is going to take us back to politics and back to Trump, is there is some pushback to lab meat, which we need to keep an eye on. So some people who are watching may have seen this in the past. This was last year. Ron DeSantis, who is a Floridian, so he banned lab-grown meat in Florida, saying it's some sort of ploy by the global elite, blah blah blah, this sort of stuff. Take your meat away from you. And from my research, I saw that there are some other states that seem to all be Republican-leaning states, which are also maybe soliciting for a ban on lab-grown meat. So that is something that is also happening, and we need to be wary of. But I will hand over to Wayne and David to see what they think of this stuff.
Well, I just want to ask the question: does anyone know, or I guess Wayne, you're going to know this? What's the likelihood of Trump's administration getting involved in, cell-based lab-grown meats at like a federal level, and or even just in terms of whether they are supportive or not supportive of it. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is one area where I don't agree with RFK Jr. RFK Jr. has come out against lab-grown meat, and he's going to be the head of, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that gives approvals on these sorts of things. Trump has kind of gone back and forth on this stuff. There are a lot of right-wing kind of pro-libertarian types who are big fans of lab-grown meat, but it seems like Trump is probably going to be less favorable for this sort of thing, largely because it's become a culture war issue. I mean, the reason Ron DeSantis came out against it was because he said, it's like these Green New Deal hippies, the global elites who want to take your burgers away and, not let you drive, and even the electric car stuff, right? Like Trump has been bashing electric cars, and lab-grown meat has become part of that. I'm honestly just not that concerned, and I'm sorry to say this to anyone who's a big fan of lab-grown meat, but I just don't personally think it's very viable. Most of the studies that I've seen suggest that there's going to be huge scale problems. It's always going to be too expensive than normal meat. And it's ironic. I think one of the reasons it's expensive is because it turns out that animal protein that's being cultivated without an immune system is very expensive to produce. Like when you grow meat in a vat, there's no immune system. It's like you're not replicating an immune system. And it turns out biosecurity is incredibly expensive. You have to keep this as like airtight as like a level 5 pathogen lab, because the moment you introduce some bacteria in it, it just like destroys everything. Like you drop one drop of E. coli just spreads like wildfire in the vats. Because normally if you have a chicken or a pig, if you get some E. coli or salmonella, there's a natural immune system that fights it off. When you have all this flesh being created, and you have some E. coli, and so they basically have to seal the place off. And actually, Lewis Bollard, he funded this big study and found that it's just impossible, like it's too expensive. So I think the Trump administration is probably going to be hostile to lab-grown meat. I'm not too concerned because to me, and I'm sorry for anyone who's a big fan of this stuff, and I could be wrong, I'm definitely not an expert in this area. I think the plant-based meats are much, much more promising. And I think a lot of the studies around lab-grown meat show that meat just isn't a good food, whether it's lab-grown or animal-based. It's just not a good food because it's really hard to produce on a scalable and sustainable way. It's like literally destroying the entire planet. But yeah, I think Trump's probably going to be pretty hostile. It's not on the top of my list of things that they're going to do that's bad for those reasons, because I just think the potential of the industry isn't that high. There are a couple companies that have produced lab-grown meat in the United States. I will say one of them is produced by someone who's a friend of mine. Actually, he doesn't work there anymore, but Upside Foods in the Bay Area. They're one of the companies that was approved for lab-grown meat. I hope I'm wrong about this, and I hope it becomes a problem that Trump is trying to stop lab-grown meat. But as things currently stand, I mean, there have been promises like that McKinsey study in 2021 saying this is going to be a $25 billion industry. Every year, these companies are promising that next year we're going to blow up. And the reality is, like, we've seen no progress, like zero progress.
I think I agree with something that Louis Ghetto just said there in the chat. Said that technology will likely be able to make this a moot point. And I know you hope that, like I hope that too. I mean, how long ago were we saying, some computing was impossible, and then now I can't remember what the number was, but like Google's AI or Google systems just did what would have taken 1,000 years to compute in 5 minutes.
The quantum computers.
It's absolutely insane. And so I've got hope that,
I hope I'm wrong.
I've got hope that they fix some, because they said the same thing about lab meat. They said, we're always going to need fetal bovine syndrome. So serum, fetal bovine serum. We're always going to need it. We can't do it without it. And then they cracked that as well, So I hope that this kind of research that Lewis did, hopefully that's just for now, right? And it's like only limitation is what we have now. Hopefully in 5 more years with the help of AI and better computing, they're like, oh no, we have this way to circumvent that. I hope
you're right.
I hope the US government doesn't shut it down, because if that would be a huge hit, because US is obviously a big player in this game, right? Technology wise and stuff. So
yeah, I hope you're right. I will say the other thing that motivates me to care more about the ethical issues rather than technology is fundamentally, this will be surprising to people, I don't actually care that much about factory farming. And the reason I say that, you might be asking, how the hell can you possibly say that? Like, you've risked your freedom so many times exposed factory farms. I care about factory farming because I'm trying to create an animal rights revolution. And that's because I actually think the damage we do to animals in the wild, I don't want to go into like a long digression of wild animal suffering. I did a podcast of Humane Hancock about this. I think what human beings do to wild animals, just accidentally because we do not care about them, is far worse than what we do to factory farm animals. And factory farming to me is just a platform for us to get people to care more about animals. And so like the technological transition to plant-based or cultivated meats might save, 70 billion animals. There could be 100 quintillion animals suffering because of what we do to natural ecosystems. Like ocean acidification or deoxygenation, or all the pollution we're emitting into the wild, causing enormous suffering. Even to beings like insects. And I know a lot of even animal rights activists say it's crazy to care about insects. I think insects are probably sentient. And I think what we do in insects is abominable. I mean, it's just not okay for us to do all the awful things we do to all sorts of sentient beings. But anyways,
could I back
I'm
you
going
up
to
a
get too
little bit?
sci-fi.
Could I back you up a little bit there and just make
Please.
the point, make the case that a lot of what you've just said, the main cause of is factory farming?
Yeah, there's some truth to that. So, for example,
Right.
deoxygenation of oceans is caused by climate change, which is in part caused by factory farming. So, again, I want to fight factory farms, but fundamentally, to me, we have to create political and moral change, because what we're trying to do is create alignment of human civilization in a pro-animal direction. And there's just so many ways. Like, the more you look into what we do to animals, the more you realize it's not just food, it's not just fur, it's not just experimentation, it's like everything.
Yeah.
Everything we do to animals is totally messed up, and messed up on a scale that's never before been seen in the history of the planet Earth. And so we have to kind of change everything. The only way we get there, in my view, is a rights revolution. And that means like using all these issues for sure and pointing out the terrible aspects of the food industry, the vivisection industry, the fur industry. But ultimately, we just need a political revolution. And a nonviolent one, for the record. I'm not saying
for
go out
sure,
there and
for
shoot people, but
Get the, what is it called? Oh, it's the thing called, it chops people's heads off. The guillotine. Guillotine out. Do it French style. No, okay, no, totally. Yeah, we're all on board. We agree with the non-violence and bringing about a revolution, and not only political revolution. I believe, and also like I speak about. It's a bit woo-woo, but I think you can make it grounded in reality. But a revolution of thought, of like a consciousness shift, where people become more aware and more concerned about these things, and some people would call that a spiritual revolution. I'm not too sold on that, because I feel like it's a little bit more woo-woo. I'm talking more just like just a cultural revolution, a political revolution at the same time. I think we definitely need that.
what you got against Jesus, David? Come on.
I mean, hey, I'm a big fan of Jesus. I live my life absolutely in the way Jesus would have wanted me to. Yeah. I wish more people who claim to follow Jesus would do the same, especially when it comes to
animal, right? Cowspiracy.
Absolutely, yeah.
How would Jesus kill an animal?
Nobody can answer it so far. Not well, anyway.
Well, Cam and Kip did a great job.
Lawrence, if you're done, I'm going to move on to a story now. All right.
Yeah, go for it.
So this is very much in line with what we've been talking about. Now, I want to ask the question here, and I'm going to give you some context before we get into it. But my question is, have people had enough of activism and activists? I'm talking about the public here. And have we, in some instances, maybe, I don't know, have activists gone too far? Have they kind of lost the strategy, lost the tactical edge, and turned everybody against us and made our jobs a lot harder? Now, the reason I'm asking this question is we have a lot of news from recently where the answer suggests that, yes, absolutely, this has been happening. I'm going to show you a couple of examples now. So here's one. It's just happened over in the UK. Activists from Animal Rising, which are a great group, by the way, went and they were protesting about the RSPCA. So in England, for those that don't know, we have the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the RSPCA. They were the world's first animal charity, and they've done incredible work and still do incredible work for rescuing animals, both wild and also domesticated animals. Unfortunately, they also took a step into working with farmed animals, and this is where things started to get very bad very quickly. Basically, they sold out to the farmers. They have inspectors that basically work for the farmers. They give their stamp of approval, RSPCA approved stamp, to pork products that come from gassing pigs to death. They give their stamp to chicken products that come from what Wayne described earlier, these slaughter lines of dunking chickens in electrified water and then slitting their throats. And, not those things are legal. RSPCA has also been found to be giving their stamp of approval to farms that have been doing things that are illegal, believe it or not, because they only do checks once a year. And guess what? They tell the farmers they're coming like a month before they turn up, so the farmers can prepare everything and do everything legal. They don't go back again the whole year. Anyway, this has all been exposed, and the guys at Animal Rising went out there to try and. So, okay, the purpose of this protest, I can't really tell you. I can't tell if it was supposed to be reaching out to the public or if it was supposed to be putting pressure on the supermarket. And that in itself is a problem. And you'll see what happens when you, I guess, I can't speak for these activists, but just look how the public responds. So as you can see, he's shoving his trolley into them. And he just said then, excuse me. So the guy, and he says in a minute, he says, I will not allow you to block my passage, he says.
Excuse you, and she said no. So now
Let go of the trolley, please.
So she said no, so you go around.
I don't care. She don't control my passage anywhere, okay? She doesn't belong to me. She doesn't own me. Excuse me.
So this continues on for some time, and then there's another lady, an older lady, who does something similar here.
You can go around, madam.
No, I'm not going round. You move. No. Well, I just knocked me away in my trolley then.
You do what you must do, madam, but we're here to make a protest and make a point, okay?
And then there you go. She goes in for it. Grandma is not playing games. So that was one example.
It went mega viral too. I saw that even in the United States.
It went very viral. It went very viral. Yeah. So that was one example of a recent things that have been happening recently. We also have popular activists Tash Peterson and Jack Higgs, who I believe my screen should have just flipped to this one now. Great, yeah. So I'll just quickly play
throw
this.
a drink in my head.
In
the other ones, they actually threw a drink or ice in the back of my head. And on one occasion, a woman actually threw her drink in my face. I've just been doing outreach at Dolphin Quay in Mandurah. I was just trying to talk to the public to bring attention to the Holocaust of marine animals in the fishing industry, hence why I'm dressed as a mermaid. And I was in an outreach with an older man and it was getting like a little bit heated, and there were a lot of teenagers just circled around listening into the conversation and sort of shouting. It was sort of like harmless in that moment, but then the older man started trying to like rile up all the teenagers, and then I ended up in another debate with a teenager, and that's when someone tried to throw a 1 litre bottle in my direction. Wow. All the drink like went on the back of my hair. My hair's like all sticky because of the drink, even on like my back and my arm. Thankfully the bottle didn't actually hit me in the head because it would have bloody hurt, I reckon. But yeah, it didn't end at the drink. The teenagers, which I feel like were a group of 20, maybe even more of them, actually started following us to our car. At that point, I was getting a little bit worried. They were all obviously egging each other on, like who knew what was going to happen at that point. So we just tried to get back to the car as quickly as we could. But yeah, they were trying to block us from leaving in the car. They were like sitting on the bonnet. We finally managed to start like getting out, and they were actually like running after us. And then they even went down an alleyway because they knew the direction that we were going to like meet us on the side. And then we heard something hit the car. And Jack said, yeah, they're throwing a rock at the car.
So that's another example of some of this. We've also got this situation with DXE recently, where during an event, this man on the left here, you can see this guy pulls out a gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My buddy Curtis was the guy who had a gun pulled on his neck. By the way, David, I unfortunately have to leave like ASAP, if that's okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I had only booked an hour for this. My apologies.
Okay. No worries. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for being here.
Is it okay if I?
No, of course. I mean,
you guys
what it is.
Continue the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll continue on this topic. It's a shame. It would have been good to get your thoughts on it, but yeah, no apologies for going over time. Then.
No worries.
Thank you, Wayne. Everybody wants to go and check out more from Wayne. We absolutely recommend you do. Link to his channel is down in the description, so go check it out. And absolutely worth checking out Wayne's work. It's incredible work. And
I got a blog, simpleheart.org. Check it out.
Amazing.
All right, I'll let you guys keep talking.
Cheers, Wayne.
Because I got a meeting with my team that I'm late for.
No problem.
All right, thanks, guys. This was awesome. Let's do it again.
Cheers, man.
Yep.
Yeah,
cheers, Wayne.
Thanks,
bye.
Man. See you. All right, so we'll continue. So there was this situation that happened with DXE, Direct Action Everywhere, a group over in the USA. As I showed you, they got a gun pulled on them. during an activism protest. And then I also went to find this. I know there's many instances of people blocking the roads, and these days they're being contested quite violently. Activists that are blocking the road for various reasons. So this is video here is from climate activists, and they're in the road singing and holding hands, blocking everybody. I suppose it's the morning. This guy comes in, grabs the sign, as you can see there. And as you see what happens in a minute, he's extremely agitated with this. I'm trying to go to work, get the F out of the way. And it looks like he's in scrubs as well. So I imagine he's in some kind of medical profession, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, that's mad.
And then there's another one here where it's some rangers. That's an actual police, I think, that just runs over a protest. Again, someone getting assaulted in Germany. Here's Just Stop Oil, and I think someone gets assaulted here. It says in the caption that the police won't do anything about it, so somebody takes it into their own hands. Let's just jump forward. Find where it is. Oh, here you go. This guy, I remember this one. He just forces his way through, basically, and they have to get out of the way. And yeah, there was this one at a Palestine protest. Someone just basically just drove their car and just worked their way through them, and then obviously gets attacked by the protesters. My point is that it appears to me more and more to be more and more the case that people they used to be tolerant, and it seems like they're becoming less and less tolerant, actually, and to the point of where, in this case, there was one more crazy case I'll show you. Someone actually shot 2 people dead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in Panama. This guy shot 2 people dead for blocking the roads. This was another environmental protest. Now, these are not isolated incidents anymore, actually. This appears to be becoming more and more the norm, as far as I can see. Like, people are getting more emboldened to get in the way now and grab people and move them away and shout at them, hit them even. And in the terms of, like, them making contact and grabbing people, moving people, hitting people, they're doing this because obviously that they see that if they want it to stop, that's the only way to stop it, right? They've been kind of pushed to that point in the case of, like, blocking the roads and things like that. And in terms of individual activists who are out on the streets trying to talk to people, it tends to be, and this is not like a rule every time, but it tends to be the ones that get the most trouble, such as Tash, for example, but also activists like Tash. They are the more adversarial types of activists. So they're going out and they're saying things like, you are animal abusers. If the person says, I don't care, then they'll say something like, you're scum, you're a scumbag, you should be ashamed of yourself. And this is the kind of thing that usually leads to somebody getting physically, throwing things at people. And there's no excuse for it, by the way. I'm not justifying it, I'm explaining it. And I think that there's definitely a theme there with this kind of response. Now, what I want to ask today is are these signs that the activism that's being done by these groups is simply pushing too hard, maybe pushing the wrong buttons in the wrong places, and that's why people are violently rejecting it? And could there be another way? Now, for example, the movements of the past that were successful did have violent arms. For example, most people support civil rights movement. Most people support women's rights movements. Right? These were 2 very successful movements that did have violent and more adversarial arms. But usually what's cited as the biggest the things that changed people the most were the civil disobedience that was peaceful and non-violent. For example, the civil rights movement, they did lunch canteen sit-ins where all they did was sat down and ate lunch where they were not supposed to. Black people, they weren't allowed in these places. They went and sat down there. Now, this also resulted in violence, but because what they had done was so non-violent, the reaction from the public was, why have you hit those people? Why were you violent to those people? They just sat there and did nothing. And so that really worked to help change the general kind of culture. And whereas what I feel is happening possibly, and this is what I'm curious to get your opinion on, is that with these protests, they are non-violent, of course, in terms of, like, no one's getting hurt and no one's getting, punched or whatever, but they are aggressive. Like, blocking someone's passage is is aggressive. It's a form of physical intervention. You are literally putting your body in the way, and calling somebody names might not be violent in the sense of physical violence, but yet it is aggressive behavior, and you get much less sympathy when somebody attacks you in those circumstances, right? For example, another polar opposite example would be with women's rights, where there was a women's rights activist who, when it was illegal for women to run in the marathon, I think it was I can't remember which marathon it was, maybe Boston.
Oh, yeah.
She ran in the Boston, I think it was Boston Marathon, and the other marathon runners, the men, were beating her. They were hitting her because she wasn't supposed to be there. Now, again, this resulted in the opposite effect, in that the people who hit her were condemned because all she was doing was trying to run a marathon. But if she was running a marathon while calling everybody pieces of shit, or maybe trying to stop other people from running, then she would have had much less sympathy, and it would have resulted in much less change. So a couple of questions to be answered here. Is violence inevitable when bringing about change? Possibly, yes. I think violence maybe is inevitable when big change is concerned. There's always going to be people who get violent. But does that mean we should be seeking out the actions that will be more likely to lead to violence? So, blocking someone's passage and saying, go round, I'm here, we've got a point to make, deal with it. Or telling people that they're scum, or they're an abuser, or they're, just basically insulting them. I don't think that we need to necessarily seek out those. I would suggest that maybe we don't need to seek out those types of behaviors that will likely lead to more violence and cause higher risk of aggression from the public, possibly. Also, one more thing I would say about this topic before I give it to you is that the movements of the past literally spent like months, potentially even years, planning strategies and training on how to ensure that they got the best results out of their actions, including the public response and the response that they wanted to get, right? As in, they wanted public favor most of the time. I feel like maybe the animal movement, the environmental movement, and other movements too, they feel like that's more of an afterthought. It's more like this might work, let's go out and do it, and let's not concern ourselves with the opinions of the public. And I don't know, I feel intuitively that's a huge mistake, and it probably explains why a lot of these modern movements are not quite as successful as these older movements that spent months training people on how to be like nonviolent and how to actually do that. So yeah, that's my thoughts there on that. I wanted to bring this up because it's very much in current media, current news, that especially if you go on Twitter, that this kind of thing, not shootings necessarily, but this kind of people, smashing through protesters in the road. It's very common now, actually. It seems to be happening on almost every protest that involves blocking a road or blocking passage. People have literally had enough, and they're smashing through these blockages, and they're pushing their trolleys through, like you saw with the grandma. So it seems like we've reached a bit of a tipping point there, and I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned it's going to go the other way, that we're going to lose public sympathy, and we're going to lose a lot of the progress that we've made in good ways. Actually, it seems like we're turning people off good things. Feels like to me. What do you think?
So I've got three things that kind of came up from what you were talking about, and to be honest, I think there's room. I think both of us are just giving our thoughts, right? None of us actually know what's going on. So the three things I'm going to say, I think, could be factors, but they may also just be wrong. So the first one I wanted to go over was, I get the impression that one of the reasons people may, so like, how you said before, there have been peaceful demonstrations in the past, and when there's been some sort of violent reaction, that has actually curried more favor for the protesters.
Yeah.
Now, one reason I don't know if that dynamic is happening here, like you're saying, because people are getting, even when there's a violent reaction, people are still kind of pissed off with the protesters, even if they may not do that violence themselves. It maybe doesn't curry as much favor. One reason could be is because for the movements we're seeing getting attacked now, they tend to be made up of people who aren't the direct victims. So the examples you gave are like animal rights people, environmental people, right? And in neither of those cases, well, with the animal case, humans aren't the direct victim.
Well, sorry, there was also Palestinian, and there were Palestinians in those protests, and the car drove through them.
Okay, so that one is kind of different. I would probably put that one down to the fact that it is just it's such a uniquely I was about to say Palestining issue. I mean polarizing issue.
Right.
It's just that is such a polarizing issue that people's emotions on that issue on both sides are so extreme that they may just not be thinking clearly in something like that movement. And this is why I'm saying like all the things I could be saying now are wrong. These are just me spitballing.
Yeah.
But I could, and also in those protests, like the people protesting aren't the people getting in the actual situation, right? There's still a different set of people, I guess. So in the animal situation, we're not the victims. In the climate situation, yes, humans are some of the victims, but you know that this is more of sort of like a grand scale thing. You don't see like something happening to someone specifically and go, oh, that is climate change, you know, or something like that. So that could be why people are more prone to reacting violently, just because it doesn't look like it's punching down, if you get what I mean. Like if you take another modern,
Sorry, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you take another modern issue, like let's say, if you had a group of like trans people, for example, walking through the street and blocking traffic, but it was specifically they were holding signs about, you know, their rights and stuff like this. It would. I can't say this for sure, but I feel like if someone used the same violent backlash against them as they would like a climate person, people would react to it very differently, I feel. Because
I don't think so.
You're actually... Are there any examples of people using violent backlash against, for example, trans?
Yes, there have been protests. I can't remember what it was, but there was some kind of something going on where they blocked a road, and people are driven through. And if you go and look at the public reaction, the only people who were upset about it, in this case, was the people who were on that side. It seems like the general... What I'm saying, my point I'm making, the case I'm making, is it appears to me that the general public is at a point where they are getting tired of being obstructed by people or being judged by people. And this is what the impression that I'm getting after, you know, researching this for a little bit, and also with, you know, so long of doing this kind of work myself now from like 2017, pretty much consistently. I see a lot more resistance today than I did back then. A lot more. And it's way more severe resistance. The things that people say now, it's been, you know, you've always had your odd crazy back in 2017, but now it's like 1 out of every 3 comments is someone who's just terrible. And I wonder if this has been caused by activists pushing the wrong buttons, let's say, and making an enemy of the people that we're trying to convince. That's kind of the question I brought up here. And to me, I theorize that, yes, I think in a lot of cases, I think eco-activists, LGBT activists, animal rights activists, I think a lot of activism with the you know, the rise of social media and our little units that we've created in our echo chambers, I really do believe that we've fallen into this trap of making everybody who's not on our side an enemy, and it's reflected in some of these choices of activism, I think, as well. Which, you know, no offense to Animal Rising, but going out into a public and into a supermarket, and instead of standing alongside the aisle next to the products and showing people, you know, if your aim is public outreach and showing them, look, this is this, they literally aimed to make an enemy of the public by saying, oh, you want to go down here? No, you will not come down here. You know, what's the strategy here? It seems to be just to annoy the public. And if that's your goal, then how are we going to get the public on board if we're simply trying to annoy them and restrict them from walking where they want to walk? How is that benefiting our movement? I just don't, or any movement, you know what I mean? And that's the kind of question that I think that that people, activists, aren't asking enough. And I think, you know, another reason I'm bringing this up is that I would hope that, I think it's a sobering point for any movement to hear this kind of thing. And I think what I'm saying is probably a silent majority out there in the world, in the public, who maybe aren't vegans, or they aren't eco people, or they aren't LGBT people, but they're sympathetic, and they're probably thinking this, like, this is like they're kind of sympathetic, but like, I can't get on board with that. That's, this stuff, it feels like you're just trying to annoy us. And I kind of agree with them on some level. Like, it does feel like that when you look at it with a critical lens. It does appear that a lot of the actions are literally just trying to rage bait people, right? Let's get some content so we can put it online and go viral.
Yeah.
Right. Let's get some people annoyed, and I just don't, I think my theory is that the conclusion of all of this is it's going to, put it this way. The conclusion of this, what I feel, is that as we saw with that guy who shot people, right? I hope I'm wrong, but I feel like if we keep going this way, things like this will happen more often. And the worst part of it is this guy wasn't particularly condemned, right? I was reading the comments underneath the story, and I was looking at the general public reaction. It was either indifferent. It was, some people were like, wow, that's crazy. A lot of people were saying that'll teach them. Hopefully it'll stop blocking the roads now. A lot of people were saying that. And so it's not even like we're going to get public sympathy if we get attacked, because people will see it as the activist instigated this by blocking the road. The activist instigated this by calling that person an animal abusing piece of scum in front of their kid, right? These reactions that people bring a gun out and hurt somebody. A lot of people are going to say, yeah, don't do that in future then. You play games, you win prizes, right?
Yeah. So
F around and find out. A lot of people are really sympathetic to that kind of thing now. Actually,
yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, like I said, like ultimately, I don't know, which is why I'm kind of just spitballing here. The other thing that came to mind, which again could be completely wrong, which I want to ask you a question about first, is, so are there any protest movements currently that use these types of tactics in some way that are associated more with the conservative side of the political spectrum? Because all the examples you've given tend to be associated with the left side, right?
Yeah, because it's only really people that are going for progressive issues that use these things, because probably of the history of progressive movements, and they base it on that. So, for example, civil rights did civil disobedience, so we'll do civil disobedience. But then the way it's being applied here doesn't appear to be with the same foresight and the same training as they did it. And that's where there's a bit of a mix-up. I haven't seen, I can't think of any, I mean, it's not, what would right-wing protests be? Okay, they go to protest and picket outside of Planned Parenthood, or they go to protest and picket outside of like events that they feel are like teaching their kids wrong lessons and stuff. But they don't tend to block roads. They tend to stand outside and chant and make the, just make their voices heard and things like that, I think.
So this is one thing that I was gonna. This is the other thing that came up. So when you had around sort of 2015 to 2021, 22 times, you had a sort of big emboldening of more progressive movements, right? And it came out often in the form of identity politics. It annoyed a lot of people, but it also emboldened a lot of activists as well. And you saw in those instances certain agitators in those groups using violent means, right? Attacking maybe a conservative, or trying to attack some lecturer, all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Even though on the ground this was a very small amount of people, on social media it was this massive story that everyone was looking at, right?
Yep.
So the only other thing that came to mind is that because we've been through this period where the perception of everyone was that these left-wing radicals have been really emboldened and some of them are using violence, maybe there's this swing to a more sort of conservative consensus, because we are seeing the sort of rise of more conservatives at the moment. You've got Trump, there's loads more right-wing groups coming up around Europe, they're getting really emboldened. you're seeing this more swing to, a conservative consensus. And it's not that all these people that are using violence against what are perceived as left-wing people at these protests, but it's that maybe they feel emboldened to use violence because there's this more swing to the conservative side of consensus anti these sorts of issues. Perhaps that's why. I don't know if that is the case, but that just came to mind.
That doesn't really convince me as much. I think what it's more the case. I mean, I think there's probably a swing to more conservative voting and things like that because a lot of people have grown tired and sick of the progressive side of things, just not getting the things done that they want to do. And some of the things that it's been focusing on is a lot of people have become politically homeless, and they look to the people that are promising to make things go back to the way they were, because a lot of things are going wrong, and a lot of people, the only people that seem to be saying we can go back to the way things were are the conservative-minded ones. The progressive-minded ones are saying there's nothing wrong. This is just part of change. We're just changing. We're making the world a better place, and it makes these things that you have to suffer through. They're for the greater good. That's what a lot of progressives say, or hint at. And so I think that's a reason. I don't think that has much of a sway when it comes to why people would be violent towards protesters. I feel like it's not specifically sorry.
No, so what you're saying isn't in conflict with what I'm saying. That is actually part of what I was saying. Okay. So I'm not saying that the swing towards more conservative politics is making people more violent. What I'm saying is those violent people always existed. Yeah. It's just
they're
because
emboldened now.
They're more emboldened because the consensus of politics is more on their side now. So they maybe feel more at ease to do these things because they won't get condemned as much, like
possibly, or it could. I mean, yeah, that's possibly the case, but I wouldn't say that's because things have changed. I would say that it's because a lot of people have held these views that they do not like this activism that's been happening from these activists, but they've been afraid to say anything because of the fear of cancellation, because of the fear of being isolated, and there's people around them that would judge them. And I think now more people are speaking and saying, actually, do you know what? I've been sick of this for the last 5 years. I've been sick of this for the last 10 years. Yeah. And then it's making other people go, oh, I agree. And I agree. And I agree. And so I guess exactly. I do agree with kind of what you're saying, but I wouldn't necessarily put it solely on the conservatives. I would put it on, it's more that people are just finally kind of realizing how sick of these things they are. And that is a problem for us or any activist out there, anybody who wants to change the world, who's been doing this kind of thing, because and it's probably the case that they got away with it for a little too long, really. And I guess when you get away with doing it once or twice, you start to think this is a good action. But this day was probably always coming, right? There's days of violence. And I think there'll be a lot more of them if these activism movements, my theory is, if any of these activism movements continue doing these types of actions where they basically, it seems like I said, their position is just to get in the face of the public and annoy them, I think that we're going to see a massive contingency of people turning on activists. And when there is violence, saying, good, hopefully that teaches them a lesson, rather than saying, we don't live in a violent society, that's wrong. I do feel like a lot of people are saying, thank you for telling them to shut up. I'm sick of them calling me a this, calling me a that. I'm sick of seeing them blocking roads. I'm sick of them getting in the way. And so that's my concern. And I guess my point is to move, before we move on to our next story, is that I hope that we can find a way to do impactful activism, or any activist can find a way to do impactful activism without it leading directly there. And if they do figure out a way to do impactful activism that isn't adversarial to the point of just trying to, block people or call them names or insult them, and then they still get violence, I think that's when you're going to see the public saying, whoa, like, they're pretty chill. Like, that activist didn't say anything hostile, didn't do anything hostile, and then you punch them in the face. I think that's where you start to win people over, and you start to create a real cultural shift in people who say, I'm not a vegan, or I'm not a women's rights activist, or I'm not a whatever, but that was wrong, and I'm on your side. I don't think we're winning that right now. I don't think many activists are winning that battle right now because of this hostile behavior that seems to have been really normalized, and then that has led to the things that we're seeing with like this one, for example, and again, it's not the problem here is the person who did this shooting. Of course, let's not pretend, he is the issue. But what I'm saying is, if those activists had not been blocking a highway, if they had been doing something different, and that was, not even an affront to anybody, but was more focusing on a governmental, I don't know, aiming at a government building or something like that to try and disrupt there or do something like that, and then they got shot, I think people would have been a lot more empathetic about it, and it might have made a bigger cultural impact. But as it stands, it didn't really, from what I saw, it didn't really take off at all. Actually, it didn't seem like anyone particularly cared apart from the movement itself. And most of the public that I saw was saying, yeah, that's what you get. Stop blocking the roads. And that's terrifying. It's terrifying. We're going to say, you can kill people because they're blocking roads. I mean, God, that's really scary. And I do feel like people have been pushed to this point where they would take the side of a murderer over an activist, and that is terrifying, honestly. So I feel we got to do some work on bringing that back. And this ties me nicely into the next story, actually, because the next story is an example of how activists really are being unfairly criticized and unfairly targeted, and that's something we should also be aware of when we do our activism, to not give an easy way to do it. You know what I mean? Don't make it easy for people to target you and make an example of you. Because in this case, this activist didn't actually do anything wrong. Actually, she did everything perfectly right. This is, her name's Sienna. I know her personally. I'm just going to scroll down. And she's being charged over footage that she was able to obtain of a farm worker. It says allegedly, there's no allegedly to it, raping a pig, right, in a pig farm. He's the son of the farm manager, of the piggery manager, and he was caught doing this. Sienna here was the person who put in the secret camera in there. And now, around a year later, this guy still walks the streets. There's still pending investigation, but the police have just decided they're going to charge Sienna, the activist, for putting the cameras in there.
Oh, crazy.
Now, that is, this is what I'm trying to say here. Is that even if you make it, you're doing the right thing, they're still going to look for a reason to come after you. And, yeah. I'll give you a bit of context on this, by the way. So with Sienna, the activist here, she actually gave the police a statutory declaration of her involvement in the investigation, which means she fully admitted everything she did in detail to the police. And the reason she did that was that she hoped that with that level of information, the police would be able to put a really strong case against this guy, right? So with her being totally honest and not hiding anything and giving everything properly over, that was her hope, that she's working with the police to get this guy. That was her point. And they used that against her. They used the information that she gave them against her instead of against him, which is absolutely insane, right? Instead of assisting with the investigation, they used that stuff to charge her. And she's likely not going to face prison time, likely is not going to, but it's still possible. It's possible that she could be up to a year and a half in prison. That's the worst case scenario. But even if it's not prison time, the biosecurity issues and the laws around that mean she'd have to pay 270,000 Australian dollars in fines. The cameras themselves, $50,000 in fines. So even if she doesn't go to prison, prison might even be better than paying that amount in fines, because I don't know if that's even feasible, So yeah, and she has priors as well from doing the same work. So it's unlikely she's going to be able to get away with this without serving some kind of sentence or being fined, right? They're likely going to convict her on all three charges: trespass, biosecurity, and installing secret cameras. Even though her secret cameras revealed extreme abuse to animals, she's the one that currently is being charged, and he is currently on... There is like a situation where his lawyer is making the case that because the footage was obtained illegally, it can't be used, even though the footage clearly shows what he did. I'm not going to show any footage of what he did, but I will show you a screenshot so you can see Here's a screenshot. I found someone had screenshotted on Twitter. You can see the guy, and it's pretty clear what he's doing there.
Yeah.
And also, I feel it's important to shame this guy. So there you go. This is his face. This is the guy who did it. His name's Bradley O'Reilly. That's what he looks like. The scumbag.
Crazy.
The scumbag. And I know I just said about calling people scumbags and not great, but in this case, I think every single person agrees that this is a scumbag, right? And not only that, before we even put this to you, Lawrence, for a little chat, I want to give you some more contextual information on this person. So this Bradley O'Reilly, the guy who did that to the pig, he's pled guilty to strangling women multiple times. He's been in court and pled guilty to 22 charges of violence against women, recklessly engaging in conduct that strangled his victim, strangled his partner, and he got away with all 22 charges because his partner dropped the charges, actually. So there's some level of manipulation going on there. There's some kind of,
Yeah.
And here's the kicker to this as well. I got some inside information on this. This Bradley O'Reilly, this terrible, terrible person, actually the woman that was leveling these charges against him, that actually dropped them, believe it or not, at the hearing where he was seen in front of a judge about the case with the pig, she was there in support of him.
Oh, wow.
So the woman that he previously strangled and went to court for was supporting him in his court appearance about him raping a pig.
There's got to be some like Stockholm syndrome thing going on there.
Yeah. So the whole thing has been pushed back until June because of apparently his defense made some claims of mental health issues, which is probably true, considering the guy's face is all over the internet and the images of him doing that to a pig are all over the internet. So he probably is suffering from mental health issues, and so he should be. And so it's been pushed back to June, but it looks like, as it stands right now, that there's a high possibility they will scrap the evidence, and they won't be able to charge him, or they will refuse to charge this guy for what he did because it was obtained illegally.
That's insane. It's just, I mean, they're getting out on a technicality because technically there was law breaking, but the law breaking didn't harm anyone, and it was done with the intention of providing evidence for greater law breaking, if you get what I mean. Like, they weren't going in there presumably maliciously to cause any harm to anyone, or but
it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter. It's wild to me that,
but it compounds the case.
If I know that you are doing something to an animal in your home that is cruelty and abuse, and I set up a camera without your permission on your property to catch you doing it, and then I take that to the police and I say, look, can you do something? I caught him doing it. And the police say, yeah, we'll get to that. But first of all, you are in trouble for setting that camera up.
Yeah.
What the hell kind of society is that? I mean, what kind of why would the police do that? And it just, it's again what we discussed is not only do you have issues with the public pushing back against activists, which is what we expect, right? We also have the big agriculture and these pig farms and these meat farms and these egg and dairy. All of big agriculture is in bed with the government, which is obviously the police are the oppressive arm of the government, right? So they'll sometimes do things that help you for sure, but then when push comes to shove, if it's financial interests and economy versus an individual activist, the individual activist is going to get thrown under the bus. And this is just a perfect case of that. And it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And by the way, the organization behind all of this, by the way, that's been, the activist organization is Farm Transparency Project over in Australia. Please do go and check them out. They're on Instagram. You can check their website. Fantastic group. And Sienna, who is part of that group and does an incredible work. She goes as a Sienna Ariel on Instagram. Sienna Ariel, if you wanted to go and check her out. And you can put the link in the comments if you want to go give her some support, because she's going to be dealing with a lot of crap and potentially some absolutely huge fines for doing God's work, to be totally honest with you. I mean, how much better can somebody be
Yeah.
right? Somebody who literally goes out there and risks everything to go and place hidden cameras to catch people doing these disgraceful things to animals. You can't get a better person than that. And yet she's now facing a criminal record for it when and this guy potentially is going to walk free. By the way, this guy, this Bradley O'Reilly, he is currently walking free. He's no bail conditions. He could be working in the farm still. And he probably is working in the farm because he needs the money, right? Insane. How has this guy been allowed to go back near animals after what they caught him doing? But no, the police are now focusing on the activists. So,
yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel a bit inadequate now because I can't really conjure anything up to say. It's just so bizarre. I just don't understand. You'd at least think that there would be some sort of. I mean, maybe it hasn't been put out publicly. Maybe we don't know, but like, you would have at least think his employer would not back him on this, you know, just so they distance them themselves in case it goes the wrong way, like, and not allow him to work there anymore. But then, knowing this industry, he could just go into the next farm and they could plead ignorance. It's just insane.
Yeah, well, it's you know, they won't go out, they won't turn on him. I mean, some farmers probably have turned on him, to be fair, but the farm actually that he works for and his family won't turn on him because when it's a big ag or a big farm versus an activist, they're not going to see sense and call out their own people because that means that they have to give in to an activist. And if you know anything about these big farms and these big agricultural organizations, it's that they will never, ever, ever give up ground to an activist. No matter what the activist has found, no matter how bad it is in their farm, they're never going to give up ground. And you see that there was a documentary I watched recently, which was called Food for Profit, and great documentary. You should be able to watch it soon. Just keep an eye out for it. And well, in one of the things, they had found some horrific things on farms, and the host, she calls up the owner of this company and she says, "Hey, we've got this footage, and some of your farms are not following your requirements." Not even pushing a vegan thing, by the way, just saying the welfare standards that you have as a company are not being met in this farm, this farm, this farm. Can we come and talk about it? And the guy just said, "Yeah, that's just farming." He said, "It's just farming. That's just the way it is. Look, it is what it is, okay? We make meat, okay? I'm not meeting you, and I'm happy with those farms." And you know, because the guy probably would agree with her if he saw the footage, but he can't give up ground to an activist, even when it's completely logical. He can't do it. They won't do it, and they can't do it because then they lose the support from, you know, the rest of the farming community, and they potentially even lose support financially, lose their connections if they give up any ground to an activist. So that's what's happening here with this guy, with this scumbag, you know?
Yeah, that's
absolutely
mad.
disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. So yeah, so please do go and do those things that I said. The links there Annie put them in the live chat. We have a super chat from Rolf. Thank you, Rolf, for the super chat. It says, like Gary Yourofsky said, it doesn't matter how you convey the message of animal holocaust if they hate the message itself. There is definitely some truth to that. Thank you. But I wouldn't say that gives the green light to go and be as adversarial as you possibly can and try to look for people to be violent to you, which is what I feel like, unfortunately, it seems to be the case and some activism is doing. Now we are well over time, but I have one more story that I would like to go through today that I think is incredibly important because I don't know if you're aware of this, Lawrence, but on February 1st it was Galgo Day or Day of the Galgo.
No, I did not.
Do you know what Galgo is?
I have no idea. I've never heard of it.
Okay, so Galgos are a type of dog, breed of dog over in Spain, mostly over in Spain. Spanish Greyhound, they're called. Here you go. I'll show you on the screen now. So this is what they look like. There's your Spanish Greyhound.
Right.
Now, Galgos, the reason I want to bring up World Galgo Day is it was February 1st, and the reason there is a Galgo Day is because of the insane cruelty and abuse that Galgos have to go through in Spain. It's actually not very well documented. I was made aware of it relatively recently, say some months ago, by the Tin Men. If you guys know the Tin Men, over on Instagram and Twitter. If you don't know who it is, he's a guy, George, his name is. He runs the account, the Tin Men, makes incredible posts that cover a lot of issues and how a lot of men are falling through the cracks of society. Focuses on a lot of issues that are usually left behind by modern human rights movements that pertain to men. Really interesting, incredible stuff. I've learned so much. I highly recommend you go and follow his account and see what he's saying there. Really, really cool account, really important. Now, he recently adopted a Galgo, told me all about them, and I had no idea about what was going on. He adopted a Galgo from, I believe it was Project Galgo, which I'll just pop up on the screen right now. So go and check those guys out as well. If you're able to adopt a dog, do consider going with Project Galgo and consider supporting them as well. Now, I'm going to explain why they need to be adopted now and what the hell's going on. So in Spain, the reason that Galgo Day is on February 1st is because it marks the end of the hunting season in Spain. They use these dogs as hunting dogs. And now what happens from today onwards, or from, February 1st onwards, is just disgraceful. So these dogs are now no longer useful to hunters. So they're abandoned or killed. And it's estimated that 50,000 to 100,000 of them are abandoned and killed every single year after the hunting season ends. Some of them are hung, shot, thrown into wells to drown, and even burned to death. Others, they break their legs and then leave them so they can't get home, right? Because they'll naturally, they know how to get back. They're very intelligent, and they're focused on, the hunting dogs. They know how to get home, so they break their legs so they can't get back home again. This is all mind-boggling to me. I mean, I'm just learning about this, so I really wanted to bring this up so everyone's aware of it. And the abuse actually doesn't start there. The abuse starts with their training. So the hunters, they will starve and deprive the dogs of water because they think it makes them more eager to hunt. And they'll also tie them to vehicles and force them to run at high speeds for extended periods because they think that's going to train them to be faster. This is the kind of horrific things they do to them. Now, they do these things because they believe it's a tradition and a superstition. They believe that the longer the dog suffers, the more prosperous the hunting season will be. So it's just absolutely baffling and disgraceful. They also, if they don't perform well in this hunting, they will punish them for dishonoring them. And one of the punishments, I'm sorry this is so descriptive, but I think this is important for us to know that, dogs, we always compare, as vegans, we compare, pigs to dogs and cows to dogs. Would you do this to a dog? Well, people are doing these things to dogs, and it's in Spain. It's not in somewhere in, the arse end of nowhere in Asia. It's in Spain. So what if the dog doesn't perform well in a hunt, then they'll punish them by doing something called a piano dance. And this is where they hang the dog by their neck with the back legs barely touching the ground and leave them to slowly strangle to death for dishonoring them, they say. And where the Galgos come from, the people that see them as a second-class animal, like Spaniards will not own them as pets because of that, because they're seen as lower than other dogs. They're bred really carelessly, and they're used for hunting by what are called galgueros, which is galgo handlers. And you can buy them for 10 euros. This is how little they're worth and how many of them they're breeding and how low they're seen. 10 euros, which is less than $10 for those who are, using American currency. And so they're easily replaceable, and that's why they abuse them so much, because it's 10 euros. If the dog doesn't perform, they don't care. There's no connection to them. They just kill them, and they'll get entertainment from how they kill them as well. Like we said, this piano dance thing. Now, it's not like, and no one's trying to solve this. There are animal welfare organizations that are working hard over there to try and do something about this, but it's not going very well, because they were able to pass a law, they were able to pass some legislation to classify animals as sentient beings, and that had implications for how dogs could be treated, which was great, by the way, when they brought that law in. But unfortunately, that law came with an exception for hunting dogs. So the Galgos got no benefit from that law. All the other dogs did, a lot of other, legal protections for other animals, but not for hunting dogs because of the hunting lobby over that. And so it's an absolutely, heartbreaking, tragic situation that, again, I only was recently made aware of. I can give you some names of some organizations that are committed to helping. One of them we already did share, Project Galgo. A couple of others that you could take down now. There is one called Scooby Medina. Maybe I could put these up on screen. Hold up. Let's put these up one by one so people can go and look into this.
Yeah,
which is a sanctuary.
I used to do some sabbing and heard, not the same stories as that, but I heard similar stories in when you were referencing the training. So I didn't hear stories about them being tied to vehicles and to be trained to or forced to run fast. Although, to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if that also happens in the UK. But I did hear about this practice of, basically depriving them of food and water, so that they are, I assume, just more desperate for food. So they're going to they're going to chase after a fox because that may be some, form of liquid in the blood, but also sustenance. And it's just insane.
No, it's just disgraceful. So there's Galgos del Sol, which I've got up on the screen now for you to see. They rescue rehome Galgos. That's I believe that's in Murcia, I think. And then there's also one I think this one's in Barcelona, if I remember correctly, SOS Galgos. So there's two other groups that you should check out and see what you can do if you can help them with donating or even adopt a Galgo. I would say, there are certain dogs that need adoption probably more than others. For example, dogs rescued from dog meat industry, obviously, and these dogs as well. I think it obviously depends on what you can do for them. It depends on how capable you are, because these are not easy dogs to care for. I've been made aware of. They can be tricky because of course, they're bred for hunting, so they need they've got a lot of energy and they're going to need a lot of help, and they're probably going to have a lot of issues. And so, if you can help, if you're in that unique position to be able to help them, then you absolutely should. There is, let's not kind of close up on this on a sad story. We can talk about, there was a story, there's many stories of heartwarming stories of these animals who've been rescued from just abject cruelty and suffering. As I said earlier, there was the Tin Men, who was one of the people who have, George at the Tin Men, who was rescued. And this dog, this guy is absolutely incredible, amazing, loving, a wonderful, wonderful animal. And if you go on these websites, there are plenty of stories of those who have got out of there and they live, really, really happy lives now. And so there is hope. And, these organizations do need support, and there needs to be more awareness raised. So just be sure to point this out if anyone's ever wondering. Or, I suppose as we're all vegans, of course, the vegans here will all have empathy. But if there are people, around you that don't have empathy in the same way that you do for cows and pigs and sheep, and send them onto the Galgos. Say to them, look, hey, at least look this up, right? Because at the end of the day, if someone's not convinced to go vegan, it doesn't mean that we can't get them to help in other ways. And this is a way that they can help. Say, okay, I'm going to keep on talking to you about veganism and these animals because I care about them. But in the meantime, you seem to care about dogs. Could you at least look into this, see if you can send some money or adopt a Galgo, right? That's a good way that we could get this, get some help over that.
Yeah, I can remember when I was young, one of the first dogs I remember having any memories of was when I was in primary school, which what's that called for Americans? It's the first school you go to after nursery,
yeah.
you know, when you're a young kid.
Yeah.
And I can remember one of my sister's friends, they had an old greyhound, racing greyhound. And I can remember being around their house or somewhere at some point, sort of, you know, looking at the dog, and the mum or dad explaining that they used to be a racing dog and they've adopted them from the industry, and they still had the, you know, the tattoo they do in the ear.
Right.
And I think that's the first dog I sort of have any memory of it, you know. I mean, I know the greyhound racing industry is very brutal, but I mean, this sounds like a whole new level, to be honest. So, you know, it's maybe a slightly different situation, but yeah, you know, it's a nice story of, you know, dogs finally getting some solace, you know, by people adopting them.
No, yeah, no, it's absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this was the point of bringing this story up, was it really was just to raise awareness, and so I'm happy that you know, that we know more about this now. And I have to say also thank you to George at the Tin Men for making me aware of this, as it was something I had no idea about. And a relevant question that actually the Chip is asking right now is, can we still use Elwood organic dog meat activism? Seems like people don't really care about dogs either. Thank you for the super chat, Chip. And yeah, the point he's making here is that some activism groups and some activists will go out and pretend to sell dog meat in hopes that it will make people kind of shake their head and wake up to the fact that cows and dogs are not so different that you can kill and eat one and not the other. At the end of the day, they both value their lives, right? That's the point of that kind of activism. And the question is, can we still do that? Well, I mean, I don't think the vast majority of people are involved in what is happening to these galgos. At least if you're in a city, if you're in Barcelona center, I highly doubt you're going to find anyone that supports this. As you go out to the countryside in Spain, you're probably going to find some people who don't care and will say they're dirty dogs or whatever. But in the cities, you know, most people are probably going to be agreeing with you. So I think that kind of activism is still effective. Just don't do that kind of activism in places where they eat or abuse dogs and it's normal, and then it won't work, you know. But yeah, so I think people do care about dogs, but not everybody, of course, but the majority of people do care about dogs. So we still have there's still some positivity there. It's not all negative. Again, this is happening here with these dogs. It is a large issue, 50 to 100,000 dogs a year, but it's happening in a very, very, very small part of the world. And it's no reason to think that, oh, everything is horrible and wrong. It's like, you know, people still in general do care more about dogs, which is a good angle for us to work with and try to expand that compassion. But it doesn't make it life any easier for those dogs, that being the case. To them, 50 to 100,000 of them, that's their whole world, even though it's a small part of the world for the rest of the animals, right? But let's go through before we wrap up today, which by the way, thank you everybody so far. The live chat's been going very, very active, and I hope you've enjoyed or not so much enjoyed that last story. Of course, it's very sad, but I hope you've learned something today and you know, found something useful in today's stream. I'll say thank you to Shannon, who tipped $5 earlier on. Thank you so much. We also have another tip from Animals Are Beautiful People, who said, after over 5 years of activism, I agree with Gary Yourofsky. It doesn't matter how you talk to them about the animal holocaust if what they hate is the message. Too many people are married to the idea that it's a human right to eat flesh. Thank you for that. I think you did that as a super chat as well. I understand where you're coming from and the emotion behind that, and also the logic behind that. But I would gently push back a little bit to say that I think it does matter how you talk to people. There are ways to talk to people that increase the chances of a very hostile and violent reaction, and there are ways of talking to people that decrease the chances. And if you speak to people in a way that decreases the chances and they still get hostile and violent, you are likely to come out looking better. The public will perceive you better than if you were looking for the hostility and violence. So I do think, although I understand where you're coming from, I don't fully agree, to be honest with you. But I appreciate the sentiment, and I've been exactly where you are right now. So I know exactly how you're feeling, for sure. And I'm sure Lawrence does too.
Hmm.
And then we got here from, Animals Are Beautiful People, who said, after over 5 years of activism, I agree with Gary Yourofsky. It doesn't matter how you talk to them about the animal holocaust if what they hate is the message. Too many people are married to the idea that it's a human right to eat flesh. Who sent this? Where's it gone?
Oh, bovine blue stocking.
Bovine blue stocking. Yes. Well, how did you know? Oh, it's right there at the end.
Yeah, it's at the end. Yeah,
Wayne, you did not disappoint. What an informative and thought-provoking episode. David and Lawrence, hope there are more to come. Best bovine blue stocking. Absolutely, there are more to come. And it's a real shame Wayne couldn't stick around. I would have loved to get his opinion on all the other things we discussed, but he's a busy guy. What can I say? I can't blame him. You know, he's got a hell of a lot going on. But
Top lad.
absolutely love Wayne Chung and everything he's doing. He's a top lad, top G. Amazing. Okay, that brings us to the end of another episode of Animal Horizon. I enjoyed this one. Lawrence, what do you think?
Yeah, yeah. No, I enjoyed it. I was getting a bit confused and batted around when we were going off on the little tangents.
We definitely lost track of time today, and we got into the main topic that was in the thumbnail about an hour in. But hey, look, we're learning. This is only our second episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, please, guys, this is so incredibly important. Hey, a friendo says later, don't go anywhere yet. Come on, please stay. Listen, please help us out. All right, please share this podcast and like and comment down below as well once it's over. This is incredibly important because otherwise, all this work that we've just done in this 2.5 hours, it's severely limited if you guys don't help us get it out there. Okay, so please help us get this work out there. Share it with people. You can share timestamps so that copy it. You can right click, copy at a specific time. If there's something you want someone to see, for example, this story about the Galgos, hey, go and watch this bit about these dogs. It's crazy. Do that, take clips from our podcast if you really want and do your own clips with subtitles and things like that and captions and put them on Instagram and tag us and all that good stuff, guys. Please, this is a lot of work goes into these and if you think it's important, then we'll help us reach as many people as possible. We need your help.
And also, if anyone has any stories they think are worth covering, then let us know as well. I mean, I'm sure it's easy enough for people to find ways to directly contact us. We both got emails. If there are any stories, obviously we can't guarantee, because we've also got stories that come up that we find and we want to report on. But if there's anything that you think might be of interest, then send them over, and
100%.
Yeah, we're always happy to look at them.
100%. The next episode we'll be doing them every 2 weeks or so. Okay, guys. So stay tuned. And in the meantime, as Lauren said, send us news that you have, send us things that you think we should cover. And anything else, any feedback you've got that you don't want to put in a public comment, just drop one of us an email. My emails, it's davidrams@gmail.com with the it's davidrams@gmail.com. Just send them over to me and we'll get to it. All right. Thank you, Lawrence. Great co-host, smashed it.
Nice
one.
Cheers.
We'll see you all in the next episode.